Hi, I'm Landon Derricks, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center.
And hi, I'm Marco Margheriti, Chairman of the World Energy Council for Italy and a member of the Atlantic Council Community.
We're here for the Summit on the Future of Energy in Torino during the G7 Energy, Environment, and Climate Ministerial.
And probably there couldn't be a better moment to be here at a point in time in which transatlantic relations have been again taken center stage after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, also in terms of energy cooperation, at a moment in time in which COP28 and the Dubai Consensus has brought to the table all actors for an actionable set of priorities across all different energies and all different energy sectors, and ultimately at a point in time in which G7 countries have to enlarge their views and bridge them with those of the Global South and Africa and the Mediterranean in particular. And I believe that there couldn't be a better place than Italy for running this discussion.
And that's why we invite you to join us as we look to drive towards common consensus and a future on energy here in Torino at the G7, beginning with a conversation from the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, Politecnico.
Benvenuti a Torino.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It is really an amazing setting here. It is one of the, I would say, the best I have ever been. So thank you very much for that. So I was asked, dear colleagues, to talk about how the Atlantic, the two sides of the Atlantic working together and what they should do, what they shouldn't do. And I wanted to share a few thoughts on that. First of all, I should say, when I look at the both sides of Atlantic, from energy, climate, and a broader picture, I feel that in the last few years, 2-3 years, Atlantic Ocean is getting narrower. These two parts of the world are getting closer, which I think is good for both sides and beyond. Some time ago, we have seen that the Atlantic Ocean is getting bigger and they are parting away from each other, these two parts of the Atlantic, but I am very happy that it is getting narrower, the ocean, and I hope it will continue in this direction. When it comes to energy and climate, we have seen several areas that this cooperation has been successful and some areas not yet so successful. Achievement number one, in my view, was that 2 years ago, on 24th of February, with the Russia-Ukraine conflict started, there was a major energy crisis in Europe, and Europe has started to pay the cost of, in my view, some of the historical strategic mistakes Europe did in energy in terms of the energy security. Because Europe's more than 3/4 of European oil and gas imports was coming from Russia. It was a major issue for Europe, European economy, European industry, and European citizens. Here, together with other countries such as Norway, Algeria, Azerbaijan, United States, was instrumental to support European energy security. This is definitely much appreciated and well noted in all the capitals in Europe. And I hope this cooperation in terms of energy security between two sides of the Atlantic will continue in the next years to come. But this was a historical cooperation and real life and real volumes. Of course, US LNG, which was crucial for European economy at that time to replace the Russian gas at a large scale was not for free. We are all aware of that, but it was very important at a vital time for Europe. The second area, I thought there was excellent cooperation between Europe and the United States, was the climate diplomacy. There were a lot of incidents, there were a lot of meetings, statements, but most importantly being COP28, European and the US colleagues work very good together with the other countries to get, in my view, a major result, achievement in COP28. You all know better than me, International Energy Agency has suggested many things in terms of the tripling of renewables, doubling energy efficiency, reducing methane emissions, etc. They are all there, and this is mainly as a result of the great cooperation between the European and US colleagues. Third area, again, in my view, an achievement, and many years to come, and still some cooperation needed, is the what do we do for the industry of tomorrow, clean energy technology manufacturing. So we have highlighted the IEA some 3 years ago that yes, we are going in the direction of solar, wind, the electric cars, batteries, electrolyzers, but manufacturing, current manufacturing of all these tomorrow's industries are focused heavily in one country. Whoever this country is not important. Important thing is what we know in the energy business. Trust the IEA. The magic word in energy is diversification. So therefore, the United States came up with a very important act, the Inflation Reduction Act. Europe came out with its Net Zero Industry Act in order to increase the manufacturing of some of, if not all of these clean energy products, electric cars, in some countries, batteries or windmills, turbines in their countries, and therefore we see diversification happening slowly but surely, maybe too slowly. And it is the very, for me, is that both sides of the ocean do not see that they are not the main competitor of each other. There are definitely some difference of views in terms of how much this or that initiative, either in the United States or in Europe, is too domestic-oriented, too much protecting the domestic markets. But I believe what they have to look at is not each other's business, but somewhere else. So I believe there is a room for cooperation between the two sides of the Atlantic in order to harmonize their efforts to manufacture the clean energy industry products ranging from solar PV to windmills, from windmills to electric cars. And here, I believe we will see in the next years to come that in addition to energy economic policies, the trade policies will be crucial. What kind of trade policies that the both sides of the Atlantic will put in place without distorting the international trade rules and with creating synergies between their efforts will be important in my view. What are the other areas I wish they can work together? One of them is the nuclear power. IEA has said 2.5 years ago, even before the 24th of February, nuclear may making a comeback. And now I can tell you very clearly, when I look at the numbers, nuclear is making a comeback, and strongly, on different avenues, ranging from the lifetime extension of the existing plants, to building new large-scale plants, to new advanced nuclear technologies, including small modular reactors. And I see also here there is a need for cooperation between these two parts of Atlantic. Another area where I think there needs to be a joint effort is the bioenergy. Unfortunately, bioenergy is not getting the attention that it deserves. At the IEA, we look at numbers. Our numbers show that when we look at the entire renewables today produced in the world, the renewable energies, in fact, bioenergy is more than 50%. Solar plus wind, we talk every day, is less than the bioenergy's contribution to our energy system. But bioenergy, for some reasons or others, doesn't get the attention it deserves. And here I am very hopeful, as I was telling a few weeks ago in Brasilia to my colleagues in Brazil, that bioenergy has a huge opportunity now as Brazil, after India chairing the G20 and COP30 next year. I expect both United States and Europe join forces with Brazil and India and other countries to make a few important steps, at least two of them are important for me, to have a scientific consensus around the sustainability of the bioenergy. And second, identifying key mandates for the bioenergy use. It can be aviation, it can be shipping and others. So I am here again very hopeful that this year and the next year that we may see that this year and next year may be a turning point for bioenergy in terms of its increase in energy use. This is one area that I will suggest, and I see that the Ambassador Dolaga is here, who is the, if I can say, the father of bioenergy internationally, and we are supporting him and the Brazilian government, together with the Italian government, in the context of G7 as well, that the bioenergy gets the attention and the support it deserves to address our energy and climate issues. My last point, and I finish here, both sides of the Atlantic, I said what they are doing and what they should do and what they shouldn't forget. What they shouldn't forget, that there is both sides of the Atlantic, but there is also the rest of the world. The world doesn't consist of United States and Europe. There is millions of people around the world, and without getting their support, without approaching them with empathy, their energy issues, climate issues, financing issues, I think none of these fora, G7, G20, COP meetings, and all the meetings be successful. So therefore, my final recommendation to both sides of the Atlantic, look at the other oceans around the world, look at the other continents around the world, and let's make sure that we all work together and towards the same goals of energy and climate change. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your intervention, Mr. Birol. Now it's my turn to introduce, following the morning session on sustainable biofuels, the intervention of my colleague, Professor Francesco Corvaro, which is a very important role in the frame of the COP on behalf of our government, and he will tell us more in more details on that. Indeed, this morning we collected a profound interest in sustainable chains, specifically on the biofuel sector, but on the whole bioeconomy, I would say. And I am pretty confident that this will be a key action of the Ministry of Energy Security and Environment for the prosecution of the activities within the COP. So it's my pleasure to introduce Stefano, and I invite him on the podium for his speech. Thank you.
So, good afternoon to everyone. Thanks to the rector of Politecnico of Torino. It's my home now. I stayed here for a lot of time. So, I took some notes because I want to start from the title, The Future of Energy, but the future is now. We have to be very clear in this. This morning we had a panel about biofuel, and like biofuel we have a lot of other technologies that are ready to help us to reach the target of the Paris Agreement. So we need to work in this line that was signed also thanks to COP28. We have a precise to-do list that we can follow using different technologies to achieve to maintain the on track on 1.5 Celsius degree. Nuclear, hydrogen, carbon capture, renewables, but I don't want to underline only this aspect. I want to go forward of this. First of all, if we have this technology, another important pillar that we need to develop is the education. We are here at the university, and it's crucial the role of the educational system if we want to have to change the crisis that we have. Right now, we have several wars. We have the climate change. We had in the past the pandemic of COVID. We need new engineers, new younger people that are able to use, to realize these technologies. So for this reason, the youth connected with our educators, professors like me, have the possibility to propose a new pathway, a new alliance that give us the possibility to return on track, because from the first global stocktake, we discovered that we are not on track to maintain achievable the 1.5 Celsius degree. So, connected with this, we need also, in my opinion, another aspect that is strongly connected with the COP and the Troika. We need to start new alliances, new relationships, new interconnections around the world. We are here to put in evidence the connection between Europe and the US, but not only. Europe has Italy inside, and Italy can be a bridge, a real bridge. In which sense? In bridge that can connect not only the USA and Europe, but also the global South. This is really crucial. Mr. Birol spoke about the climate diplomacy. With climate diplomacy, we need also to develop the energy diplomacy, and they must be together. Only in this way, in my opinion, we can realize a real security system for our nations. And I hope that what is doing from Italy with Africa in this G7 can be an example for the future of the other G7. G7 was founded in 1975, and the world is changed from there. We have a completely different situations. If G7 wants to have a rule in this new world, from my side, it's time to open new relationship, in particular with the global South. From my side, the idea of Meloni and Tajani to involve in this G7 the African continent has this purpose, to underline that thanks climate change, we can discover that we are together on the same condition. And this is crucial, because climate change, the needs of water, needs of land, and all the changes that we have can become a possibility also for new peace and new prosperity. This is what Italy wants to put on the table of the G7, using the climate, environmental, and energy summit. Because alone, we are not able to do nothing in this new world. This is clear. And again, the role of G7 can be very important if we have the capability to understand how it is important, the interconnection and the diplomacy. We have very strong and important traditional diplomacy that is working in different worlds, but we have to work with a new kind of diplomacy connected with energy and climate that must be open to everyone. Last Tuesday, I was here with the scientific attaché, and Tajani said a real new thing from my side. He was speaking about the competitions that sometimes you can find the website of foreign minister, and this is a competition for scientific research. And this is a possibility to create connection between several universities. In this case, we were discussed about Israeli and Italian university. And he said that scientists, so scientific research, climate change, have a different role in comparison with the other and traditional diplomacy. We need to maintain this kind of connection because it is something that is useful for everyone. And this is what I try to do during my job in the UN organization. This is the pathway that we have to follow if we want to maintain the target of the Paris Agreement achievable. We have no other way to solve this. And I was very happy that Tajani said this, because it put in evidence how it is important what put everyone at the same table in comparison of what can create differences. Why not think about this? Because we can find also new possibilities for the peace, for the peace in the world, for example. I have another example, and I am at the end. One of my colleagues in Perugia, thanks to his contacts, was able to organize a meeting in Rimini that is a town on the Adriatic coast, between 5 Israeli technicians and 5 Palestine, to speak about what? Water. And at the end, they arrived to organize a sort of plan for water, both for Palestine people and for Israel one. This is what we can do. This is what, in my opinion, we have to do. Because from a technology point of view, we have a lot of several solutions, not very much, but several solutions. It's time to change our mind. And for this reason, I support very much the youth, because they have these capabilities. Thanks very much.
Just a small adjustment. Good afternoon, everyone. While my panelists are getting settled in and comfortable, I just wanted to make sure that we recognize some VIP officials who just joined us in the room. It's my pleasure to recognize Marcos Neto, who is Assistant Secretary General of UNDP, and Ambassador Andrea Carrera de Lago, the Brazilian Climate Envoy, who are with us in the room today. Well, thank you again for joining us on this cloudy but still beautiful afternoon. My name is Olga Hakova. I run our European Energy Security and Climate Programming at the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. We only have 30 minutes, so we are going to keep this conversation going pretty quickly. First of all, I'll start off with quick introductions of our fantastic panelists. We have Halima Croft, who's the head of Global Commodity Strategy and MENA Research at RBC Capital Markets. Paolo Gallo, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Italgas. We have Dr. Vijay Swarab, who is the Senior Director of Climate Strategy and Technology at ExxonMobil. And we have Pavel Vujnovac, who is the owner and CEO at PPD. What a lineup. Thank you for joining us. So as you are seeing the name, the name of the panel, we're talking about, it's massive. We're talking about navigating transatlantic energy and climate security amidst all of these geopolitical tensions. Over the last 4 to 5 years, we have seen what these geopolitical tensions can do to our progress on climate. We have seen what those tensions can do and those conflicts can do to our energy security, and we've seen what it can do to economic development. So how do we not forget the lessons learned, carry them into the future, but I will challenge us to also explore ways that we not only respond more effectively to the next crisis, how do we work together to avoid and get ahead, be offensive versus being on the defense against the next big thing and next big crisis. G7 has had incredible track record of collaboration, and when we work not just G7, but its partners too, we've seen what we can do when we work together. So how do we re-energize that level of cooperation looking into the future? One of those areas, of course, has been standing up to Russian aggression and standing together with Ukraine. Halima, I'm going to go to you first, if that's okay. As you know, you are a top commodities specialist out there. What is your take on how effective, the G7 sanctions have been on Russia, and what should we expect in this election year?
First of all, thank you so much for having us here. It's such a pleasure to be in this beautiful room of so many incredible experts. And I think it's important when we think about the Russian energy sanctions that I think the real intention of the way we looked at Russian energy was an emphasis on keeping the market well supplied. I mean, Fatih Birol's opening comments about how the G7, how the global community of nations came together to help Europe avert an energy crisis, I think that was a guiding principle of how we thought about Russian energy. We thought about surging supplies into Europe from other places, but we also really focused on averting a major supply disruption. And when we think about price caps, we think about really measures that were designed at its heart to keep Russian oil on the market. Yes, it was set at a level that was talked about in terms of reducing Russian revenue, but I think the core objective really was to keep the market well supplied, and that meant allowing Russian barrels to move to Asia when they were no longer allowed into Europe because of the EU's sixth package of sanctions. Now the question is, as we face now, is did that mean that basically Russia was unable to keep enough revenue to continue to fight the war? And if you look at the work the Atlantic Council has done on Russian revenue assumptions for this year, this is going to be a significantly large Russian defense budget based on an assumption of a 1/3 increase in Russian revenue. And that at its heart, I think, speaks to the fact that Russia has been able to maintain the financial bandwidth to continue to fight this war. And so the question is, will there be tougher measures to try to defund the Russian energy ATM? Will Ukraine continue to target Russian energy infrastructure? That has been a source of contention with the administration in Washington. Does the fact that the aid has finally been unleashed in Congress, does that mean that Ukraine basically says, okay, we will cease and desist from attacking Russian energy? I think these are all the key questions, but certainly I don't think we can look at the track record on Russian energy sanctions and say that it materially helped Ukraine be in a better position to win this war.
While I have you, can we dive in a bit on the Iran sanctions? Are we going to see those being enforced, especially the new Iran sanctions? And should we pay attention to the volumes being off the market? Is that feasible? And of course, the upcoming OPEC meeting this June. So I know it's a lot there, but I figured since I have you here, I might as well dive into these areas.
This is a really important question because a key part of the aid package that passed for aid for Ukraine, aid for Israel, included congressional measures to strengthen the sanctions architecture on Iran. Now, people in this room who've worked a lot on sanctions have said that the existing sanctions architecture is pretty significant. And so if they did want to actually rigorously enforce the existing measures, you could have lower volumes of Iranian barrels on the market. But what I think is important about the new measures that have been passed by Congress is that for the first time, it goes after ports that take Iranian barrels. And so what's important about that is certain countries have seen significant increases in their exports of energy to China, and they're not actually significant oil producers. So a country like Malaysia has seen a significant rise recently in exports to China. Those are largely thought to be Iranian barrels. And so the question is, will we see a new effort to actually penalize those ports, or will we try to kind of keep status quo on Iranian volumes through the use of waivers? So I think this is a very important question as well, and it does play in certainly into, I think, OPEC decision-making dynamics, where I think OPEC has now decided, or at least the Saudi leadership has decided, that they're not going to increase production before seeing significant volumes come off the market. Like in 2018, we asked Saudi Arabia to increase production by 1 million barrels a day after we exited the Iranian nuclear agreement. We then gave waivers to 7 countries to import Iranian volumes after the Saudis surged by 1 million barrels and prices crashed to $30. So I don't think the Saudis and OPEC are going to look to front run with additional barrels anything that could potentially make up for lost Iranian volumes until they actually see a significant enforcement effort.
Thank you so much. Well, now that we've covered everything we could cover on oil, let's move on to natural gas cooperation. This has also been a significant area where the allies, not just G7, but broader allies around the world have worked really hard together to ensure security of supply while also trying to balance the need and the urgency to decarbonize and keep competitive pricing. Paula, we'll go to you next. Could you share with us your thoughts on have we, following COVID and then horrific war in Ukraine and then following tensions in the Middle East, are we at a point where there's consensus broadly around the future of natural gas? And considering Italgas's leadership role in the infrastructure and also distribution, how are you envisioning gas grids being able to adjust to this pressure to diversify, decarbonize, but also secure the energy system at the same time?
Well, quite complex question.
I have all the easy ones, don't worry.
Now, let me say that, first of all, let me thank you, Atlantic Council, to be here and to speak representing the overall gas infrastructure. I'm probably the only one here sitting talking about gas infrastructure as a whole, in particular gas distribution. Well, to respond quickly to your question, which is the future of natural gas, there is a consensus. I would say yes. I would probably take the more general question to say there will be a consensus about future of gases. So bringing not only natural gas as we know, but bringing into the picture many of them. And to give such a consensus and to give such a future, we need to have a very resilient and redundant gas infrastructure. I think what happened after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is that we felt that our infrastructure was not as redundant as should be. And during the last 2 years, there has been a large effort to improve that situation through construction of LNG terminal and through making the pipeline more available to larger volume. So I think the first point to guarantee what also Lara was talking about for security of supply is that we need to have a platform, we need to have a large infrastructure, and is, of course, LNG terminal, storage, transmission, and distribution that will help to make available the energy, clean energy, to Europe. But let me say that for future, we don't have to think about a traditional gas infrastructure in the way that we thought in the last 20 years. I think we are undergoing a significantly change in the way that the gas infrastructure is built and is managed. For example, we will see more and more a decentralized gases production, and when I say gases production, I'm referring to biomethane, I'm referring to hydrogen. So we will move from a very centralized situation like we knew up to now to a much more decentralized. We will have thousands of biomethane plants, thousands of small electrolyzers producing hydrogen. So from that point of view, we need, for the future of the energy transition and for the future of security of supply, we need to have an infrastructure that is more flexible, that is upgraded, and that is covering all the portion of the infrastructure, not only gas distribution. Probably gas distribution is the most one impacted, but same for the LNG, same for the storage, and same for the transportation. That to me will make, and we need to have it, is pivotal gas infrastructure for our future to accommodate today natural gas coming from different sources, but tomorrow, and we have talked in this day quite a lot about other kind of gases, the renewable gases, biomethane, hydrogen, e-methane. That's the way in which I see it is a clear consensus. And even if you think about REPowerEU, that was a reaction to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, REPowerEU foresee, and probably they put probably a very difficult challenge in front of us to reach by 2030 to replace what was 50% of the gas imported by Russia by biomethane and hydrogen. So even the REPowerEU has said clearly that we need to diversify not only the source of supply, but also the kind of gases that we are putting into our infrastructure.
Thank you so much. And 30-second quick follow-up for you. How important will the international routes continue to be as in this massive transformation of, not only how energy moving, but what type of energy is moving through this infrastructure? How will the geopolitical partnerships shift through this transformation?
Yeah, I mean, somebody may think that you don't need those anymore, but that is not absolutely true. In the other sense, even if you bring into the market green gases, it will take time, but these green gases will not be able to satisfy, I mean, the huge energy demand by, let's say, taken by the European Union. The large infrastructure will need to complement these green gases offer, but that is in the, let me say, short, medium term. But if we look at the more longer term, if we go back to what I said before, that there will be, for example, taking again the example of the REPowerEU, importation of hydrogen, how you can import the hydrogen. We need to use the existing infrastructure. We need to upgrade the existing infrastructure in order to be used also for other gases. And otherwise, you may request to build new infrastructure with a huge amount of money that is requested, while with a limited effort you can upgrade the existing infrastructure to accommodate other gases. So if we are talking about the 10 million tons that should be imported of hydrogen according to REPowerEU, we need to have infrastructure such as, let me say, LNG, but it's not LNG anymore, it's hydrogen, or such as pipeline that are able also to move around this energy. And honestly, only gas infrastructure today can guarantee the storage, can guarantee the transportation and distribution of huge amount of energy.
Thank you so much. You touched on different technological solutions. So Vijay, we'll go to you next. I feel like technological exchange and ramping up new solutions, sharing best practices, I feel like that's an area that I don't think I've heard anyone disagree that that's a huge opportunity for G7 and broader partnerships. But how would you, what grade would you give our cooperation so far? Do we get an A or do we get a C, maybe C plus or a B? And what do we need to do in the future to actually kind of get into some tangible ways that cooperation can improve on technologies?
Well, first off, thank you again for the invitation. It's an honor to be here and in a university. So you're asking me a grade question in a university, and I think the quite honestly, the answer is we don't know yet. We do know that we have a track record of very high marks in technology transfer, particularly between the US and Europe. If you go back to a lot of the technologies that we use in energy today, whether it's the catalyst, whether it's the exploration, whether it's the modeling, whether it's the computer itself, those were largely US and European inventions, and in fact, the majority of those started in universities and then were scaled up through industry. I think if I was to summarize what we've heard so far today between Dr. Birol's comments and even the comments here, I think the one thing that we keep reminding ourselves is demand needs to be met. And when something happens on the supply side and demand is still met, the underlying reason why it's met is because we found a technology solution. And what Dr. Birol just said was we're short on technology. And so we need to develop the technologies. And the thing about the technology and energy that is unique versus any other industry is it needs to be a technology that can scale. And when we talk about scaling, we're talking about scaling not just the pure technology, but also the infrastructure. And then matching the supply and the demand, which, quite frankly, again, if you look at the IEA reports, we're behind track on technology. So you're asking for a grade. I would say that we're making progress. We're not making progress fast enough. This is an acceleration that's needed. We talk about speed, but it's actually acceleration. It's the second derivative, if we're going to do math, that's actually needed. And a way to accelerate, two things to think about if we're going to try to accelerate. Number one is you collaborate. So if you want to accelerate, you collaborate. That's kind of the theme here. The second thing, if you want to accelerate, is you do things in parallel. So the process of doing things in series, the first thing you learn in physics is parallel processing will beat series processing. And so if we can figure out how to collaborate and we can collaborate in parallel, then we have a much better chance of improving our grade And I continue to be optimistic. I think we will get an A at the end of the semester, but we're in the beginning stages of the semester. And we're still trying to figure out how we're going to navigate this space.
I love the optimism, and I'm going to ask you a quick follow-up question. If we can dive into more on the industrial competitiveness and technologies that can help us. I feel like following, and we're not really done with the energy crisis, let's be honest, but what has really come to light is the need to ensure affordability and competitiveness of energy prices all across the world, and how important that is. How can technologies help, and cooperation and technologies help there?
Well, I think the most important thing about technology is technology can transfer across borders very quickly. That's the beauty of technology. And we see that today. If you look at the technologies that are used in energy today, you actually, anywhere in the world, an exploration is about the same, a chemical plant is about the same, a refinery is about the same. And so, as the emerging technologies come and they're ready to go to scale, I think we can do that. And again, the last go back to Dr. Broll's final comment, which is there's a lot of people out there that don't even know what we're talking about. So we have got to get these technologies, and we've got to get these deployed so that we can get the people that just want access to energy. And so this is a bunch of parallel processing. We need to increase supply. We need to decarbonize, we need to deploy technology, we need to close energy poverty, we need to grow economies. Those things all have to be done together, and the common ground, the common denominator, if we stay with math terms, is technology. We've got to get the technology, and we've got to transfer the technology.
Thank you so much. Pavel, we'll go to you next, if that's all right. You live and breathe these kinds of cooperations and figuring out how to work regionally. You know, you're based in Croatia, and a lot of your work is in Croatia, but you work all across the region. You know, tell us some of the lessons learned there of how do you manage to balance these partnerships, geopolitical tensions, and what does that look like in everyday work?
So first, I'm very honored to be here to share some views of mine. I would start basically from Europe. Let's say Europe, after the war started in Ukraine, Europe suffered a big shock. I mean, regarding the prices and regarding the supply part. I would refer mostly, I mean, I come from Croatia, so I would refer mostly to the Central Eastern Europe, which has a special position because on the conventional fuels, basically it was supplied mostly from the east. So in the first phase, basically lots of directions, lots of supply basically changed, and Croatia played a big role in the region regarding first what we needed to substitute certain conventional fuels which were coming from the east with additional capacities and supply from the global market. So Croatia, with its seaside, basically we played a role increasing capacities on the oil supply, and also Croatia, I have to say good words about the Croatian government there, that basically we finished the LNG terminal 3 years ago, and just on time, so we could diversify the supply of the region with natural gas from US mostly. And even now, with all this, we have the opportunity to increase capacities, which would bring to the region additional security of supply of conventional fuels, and even it can be a source for Ukraine post-war with natural gas. Plus, what was needed in the region, and this is now ongoing, is the increased interconnectivity between the countries, increasing the interconnectors with the capacities that natural gas can go faster and let's say faster and more secured around the region. And even now we are doing the interconnections with Bosnia and Herzegovina, we do with Serbia, increasing capacities to Hungary also. All the interconnectors are increased. So in the first phase, basically, we are dealing with increasing the conventional fuels. Later, we will go to the substituting conventional fuels, becoming more independent and implementing the green energy inside.
Let's talk more about that. What is the green energy implementation? What does that look like for Croatia in the region? Let's start with, like, where do you see the biggest challenges? Where do you see, like, what are the things that are stopping this development?
So let's say there is number one challenge, which I would put with capital letters on the top, which is grid, which is basically the infrastructure, like infrastructure which needs to be done that it can absorb the production from the green projects, and also the infrastructure which would help balancing these, let's say, curves on the production. So what's the problem that, what's the challenge there is that basically in Europe, and in Central Eastern Europe, these grids and transmission systems are owned by the states. It's regulated business, and basically it needs to be pushed from the politics. What we see now, I come from the private sector, what we see, we can develop as much as more green projects also in solar, in wind, in geothermal. I will come back to this later. But we need the investments into the grid which are not following the development of the green projects. So this, especially in the electricity, I say. So we have the challenge there. We need to speed up on these investments. Later, private sector, I think, can develop and will invest financing, and it will invest money into these development of the projects, but it also needs some incentives from the regulation on the top. In Europe, which can provide unified regulations for countries, especially in the Central Eastern Europe. So the grid is the main challenge, and then we have this story about developing the projects, which needs less administration, like speeding up. And we need to choose also some, we need to determine the potentials of each region, especially, let's say, this Central Eastern Europe. This is below the Carpathians. This is geothermal energy is the big potential of the whole region. And geothermal, as we all know, this is the only real renewable source, which is basically producing the base load of energy, which doesn't need any balancing. It doesn't need any grid adaptation. So I think we need from EU, we need unified regulation. We need also the push on the grid investments. And we need more incentives on the private investments developing the green technologies.
I'm really glad we went into some of the specific tangible recommendations, because it's really important to connect the big vision, which I think we all agree on, but it's the steps and the pathways where I feel like sometimes we get either lost or turn different directions. We have enough time for a lightning round, so I will, Halima, I will start with you. How does this G7 feel different from the past G7 or even last year's, and what gives you hope? What keeps you optimistic about the future?
What makes me optimistic were the comments that have been made by the minister and other Italian officials talking about the Italian initiative to really work with Africa and really trying to bring the global South into the conversation, because I feel like far too often when you end up at COPs and other big global events on climate change, you have a really strong pushback from nations in the global South saying that you're not addressing our profound energy poverty and access issues. So the fact that Italy is leading with collaboration with Sub-Saharan Africa, I think, is tremendous.
Paula, we'll go to you. Same question.
Well, why I think this G7 will be successful is because we have heard either yesterday and this morning about the different ministry that the approach toward the energy transition has changed, is not ideological anymore, is much more pragmatic and realistic, is a way to lever and to use all the tools that we have in order to reach this transaction. Ministry Pichetto Fratin told us this morning we should move step by step on what we know and what we have. And I think if you go back to reality, if you go back to a better understanding of the potential, if you use all the technology, it was mentioned before, all the technology that we have, in even accelerating the technology with no prejudice, with no biased approach, then I think we'll be successful. And listening to the discussion we had yesterday and today, I'm very optimistic about.
Paolo, let's go to you next.
So what's bringing positive feeling is that what I think we see more and more collaboration, as a colleague mentioned. So what we see is more and more awareness about these green technologies, but what I think brings the most, so today we look at these technologies, some of them are not really on the level of implementing today because it has no economical, let's say, returns. But I think the technology is developing so fast, and I think we are not aware what happened last 15 years with all these technologies. So I think in few years, it goes like the curve is speeding up. So I think in few years we will be astonished what we will see in 5 years regarding the development.
All right, Vijay, bring us home.
All right, let me try. So here's what's happening. Pledges are great. Pledges have to become plans. Plans have to become action. That's what we're beginning to see. Action is getting on the deployment curve. For technologies to go up in scale and come down in cost, you have to deploy. And we're beginning to see that. You see hydrogen projects being announced, CCS projects being announced, biofuels projects being announced, geothermal projects being announced. That's the stage of the transition. It's early stages. I think pragmatism is setting in. Supply must meet demand. That's the golden rule of energy. It's a simple rule, but supply has to meet demand. We have a technology shortage. We've got to get to action. We've got to get on the deployment curves. Policies can help get on the deployment curves. Policies have to lead to markets. I think we know what has to happen. And these collaborative events, these types of events that we're participating in, help us accelerate on the deployment curve.
Fantastic. Well, we've got the vision, we've got the tangible steps to get there, and we've got the partners to do it. So I hope you're all energized. Thank you so much for joining us. And please stay for our next panel, Financing a Clean Energy Future, Building Sustainable Economies and Bridging Global Divides.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our next panel here at the Summit on the Future of Energy. Thanks for the Atlantic Council for hosting us here so generously. My name is Sleebeck. I'm Senior Director for Europe and the Middle East at the Clean Air Task Force, a global climate organization focusing on overlooked solutions, and also a non-resident Senior Fellow here at the Atlantic Council. And I'm really, really excited to welcome you and my panelists to our next conversation, Financing a Clean Energy Future, Building Sustainable Economies and Bridging Global Divides. And I think we've been perfectly set up for this panel. We've heard a lot about the need for technology optionality, a lot about the need to get to scale to deploy as soon as possible. But a big question mark that is on the agenda, particularly this year, is financing. I think particularly with a view to COP29, the questions are, how can we unlock financing to get to steel in the ground? Who has to pay or should be paying for what? Who should be taking on which risk reduction? And most importantly, and Halima, you said it, Dr. Birol said it, how can we get more financing also toward emerging markets? So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce my panel. I have with me today from the right, Alessandro Basciani, who's the Senior Vice President, Climate Technology Solutions at Baker Hughes. Lindsay Merrill, who's Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Energy and Investment at the White House in the United States. Tim Holt, who's Executive Board Member at Siemens Energy. And last but not least, Lorenzo Motura, who's Executive Vice President, Strategy, Corporate Development, and Innovation at Edison. And actually, Lorenzo, I want to start with you because in preparation for this panel, we had a long discussion around the need for all technology solutions to be present or to be deployed to really have a grid that is energy secure, that keeps costs as low as possible, even though it will be expensive to deploy next generation technologies, but also looks at some of the other trade-offs, land use, energy security, economic security, reliability. So I want to go to you and give us your thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Lee, and thank to the Atlantic Council, to World Economic Council, and to Politecnico di Torino for the invitation. So I think that if we want to keep at country level the price, the cost for energy transition as low as possible, we have to consider three important elements. The first one is the energy mix we are aiming at, and this is very peculiar to each specific country. And I would like to make an example here. So we have run a simulation for Italy at 2050 with a detailed advanced dispatching model on two different scenarios. The first scenario was the scenario that the Italian government declared in 2021. So carbon neutrality by 2050, 100% renewables. And we know that renewables are not programmable, so they need a lot of storages, they need overcapacity, and they need connections to bring the electricity from south of Italy to where the demand is in the north. And the scenario that we simulated, it's an optimized scenario where we try to, let's say, find the right balance between renewables and programmable energy. And it turned out that something like 80% of renewable is somehow the maximum level of renewable it is possible to put economically into a country like Italy. And the remaining part is programmable capacity, and if Italy managed to go back to nuclear, then a part of that can be nuclear, not 100%, so 10% could be nuclear, the time for adoption of nuclear, and the remaining part, it's gas, so gas-fired power plants with carbon capture and sequestration. So by comparing the two different scenarios, the difference in the system cost over 15 years' time, 2035, 2050, it's 400 billion euros in difference. So if you do not take a technology-neutral approach, you risk to aim to a mix which somehow it's not affordable. So this is the very first element. The second element, which is very important, is when you choose technologies, you have also to look for, let's say, the local content. What of that technology can be constructed in the country where you are? Because somehow, I take another example, the first part of the energy transition we are doing in Italy, we are doing it with solar, so PV, and batteries, and wind. And we buy panels from China. We buy batteries from China. So this cost of the transition goes out of the country. If we are able to, let's say, bring some of the industrial activities within the country through cooperation, for example, what's going on in nuclear with the small modular reactor, where somehow it is possible to build the components, the modular components in the country, leveraging the supply chain of Italy, that's a way to, let's say, develop industry, develop GDP, so create wealth that can be then exploited to support transition. And the very last element, which is particularly relevant, is the fact that, and we see today a lot in Europe, we have plans for transition which are sent to Brussels, and they are standalone plans. So if you think that energy security and independency, it's simply a country need, country by country, this does not work. This is not an optimized way. So by drafting a plan which is at regional level, by complementing the different sources of energy in a given region, Europe, but also other regions, this is very relevant to reduce also the cost of transition. So these are three elements that have to be considered.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I think really, really important. Technology optionality can lower costs for the system overall, and then we need to move from pledges to plans, which we've already heard from Vijay earlier. Alessandra, I want to go to you. You're at the forefront, or Baker Hughes is at the forefront of Steel in the Ground project. So what is your strategy to work with your customers and partners to help them decarbonize? And maybe you can also tell us, we're talking 2050 timeframes, but also heard the future is now. Where's the difference between short and long-term opportunities?
Sure. Thank you very much for having us here, by the way. It's a huge pleasure. Technology first. Obviously, we offer technology to our customers. There's technology that is deployable today, and there's technology obviously is going to be available in the next few years. It's not that are through steps. It's going to be fundamentally a continuous kind of process, and we are part of that equation fundamentally. Exxon was mentioning before. There's a possibility today to invest in hydrogen, the possibility to run projects in hydrogen. There's technology to produce green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and there's technology to do carbon capture. There's technology to do to manage fundamentally the CO2 at the end of the day. There's technology available to do it to eliminate methane emission, which is another kind of important, very important aspect, in particular when you talk about the developing countries. What we offer technology, and we offer long-term services within the customers. Generally, we provide equipment, and we do aftermarket services, and we team up with the customers. Obviously, this is an area on the energy transition, if we want to still call in that way, the sector, where there's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of unknown in terms of how we're going to approach a certain project that has never been done. And obviously, we offer our ability to develop projects. We offer our ability to run projects from a supply standpoint. And we take some risk together with the customer. So we have also commercial frames that are going to help the customer, are going to provide from ourselves a little bit more skin in the game. So we leverage a little bit on everything in order to really accelerate the deployment of technologies, accelerate also the creation, if you will, of a market that is fundamentally needed if you want to go through this transition. So those are the two aspects that obviously we are super committed to the industries and to the segment.
Thank you. I think really interesting just to hear, you take risk with your customers together to optimally allocate it, and really thinking through what are some of the fastest actions we can do today to reduce methane while also planning for next generation technologies. So Tim, over to you. As a true transatlanticist, German, but living in the United States, I think you're following both sides of the Atlantic. So tell us a little bit, we heard NZIA here in Europe, IRA obviously has been passed a while ago in the United States, and we're seeing first many projects being announced. So where, from your perspective, do you see the role of regulations, funding, market mechanisms in driving the transition? And are there new ideas for policy mechanisms to drive financing?
No, thank you for the question. And again, thanks for inviting me and being here. It's a really honor. When we talk about energy transition, this is really about the technologies that drive net zero. At the same time, I think we shouldn't forget, and we just heard it, it has to be affordable. And also, I think since the last couple of years, it's all about energy security. So we have to keep that trilemma into account when we look at how do we drive it. At the same time, when we talk about energy, what we do is expensive. When we talk about the projects we do, they're all billion plus, so it's inherently expensive. It's long term. A lot of the projects we do as an industry are multi-years. When we look at what we do jointly, we look at 5-6 years, even longer, from the idea to implementation until we have the production in place. And it's complex. So I think what we have to really tackle with the regulation, how do we tackle the energy trilemma, and how do we tackle the inherent setup of the energy landscape? And I think that's where we really have to look at the market and regulation. How does it support in getting to the goal? If you look, we talked about, take for example, wind. I think the wind industry started 25 years ago. It wouldn't have started without help from different governments in terms of incentive, also in the push, but we also have seen the effects the different mechanisms could have. Take PTC in the US. For us as a supplier, it was always a stop and go. There was a limited time, and then lots of demand. We ramped up supply. Then when PTC was going to expire, basically our factories ran empty, and we had to rethink: do we restructure, do we idle, and do we go back? So I think what we really need is this long-term planability and the certainty, and I think that's what we see with the IRA. And I think for the first time we see really a longer-term commitment that helps us really to deploy the technology, but also to make the CapEx investments. I think on the other hand, we also have to look, if we deploy renewables, what do we do with firm power? Yes, there's a lot of ideas on storage and what we can do, but also, and we heard it before, gas will play a role. And I think certain markets, especially on the European side, we all want to develop technologies that are hydrogen ready. But before that, who's going to invest in gas capacity without a known capacity payment that will support the market? We heard about, and I'm very happy that it was mentioned, grid. I think for a long time we have underinvested in the grid. We see that in the US, we see that in Europe. The last 3 years have been tremendous, but also the supply chain isn't getting there, and same long-term planability, very important to make sure we have the certainty that as suppliers we invest in new capacity. We just announced $600 million in CapEx as a company until in the next 3 years in expansion, but I personally believe the market is much larger, but as a company you're also naturally a bit restrained in how much CapEx do you put in capacity expansions, especially if you have been in an industry that has been restructured multiple times over the last 20 years. And then maybe allow me on the last one, hydrogen, which is an interesting one. There was a lot of discussion, I think, in the last 2 years on hydrogen projects. As a supplier, we invested into a gigafactory on electrolyzers. That factory is currently not running at full capacity, not running at half capacity, because all the projects are slipping. And I think also with the IRA and the latest ruling how it's going to be reimbursed, a lot of the projects are slipping. So the capacity is there, we're trying to meet the demand, but the demand isn't there or the demand is slipping. So I think there's also some kinks we have to work out how we look at the mechanism to make technology fly.
Thanks, Tim. Just want to reiterate your last point for policymakers. A lot of pieces of the puzzles have to fall into place to make infrastructure and projects work, supply and demand. And I think policymakers need to pay closer attention so they can get the timing of incentives, permitting, infrastructure regulation right. But I do want to shift gears and go to you, Lindsay, because what we're hearing is a lot more much needed pressing focus on emerging markets. I just want to say, according to my own organization's analysis, the majority of modeling for African countries has been produced after the Paris Agreement and actually doesn't include any advanced energy technologies and really looks at 54 countries as a single uniform entity. So I think much more has to be done to really understand how energy demand and energy access can be met as a building block for climate action. So I want to go to you and ask you, how does the Biden administration work with the other G7 countries here to mobilize capital for clean energy infrastructure investment in emerging markets, especially as you're looking to COP29?
Thank you, Lee, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for having me here today. I'm honored to be here, especially with such esteemed colleagues. President Biden has taken a keen interest in domestic infrastructure, but also infrastructure abroad. In 2022, at the G7, we announced the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGI, which aims to mobilize $600 billion of investment in infrastructure, clean and sustainable infrastructure, by 2027. To date, the United States has mobilized $30 billion, and we will continue to work towards that goal of $200 billion by the United States as a part of the G7's goal of $600 billion by 2027. We've taken the approach, especially in emerging markets, Africa, the Indo-Pacific, Latin America, of finding economic corridors, finding specific geographic locations where we can really throw a lot of money there instead of spreading around $1 million here, $5 million there, really trying to make an impact in these economic corridors. An example of this is the Libido Corridor, which was announced a year ago. The Libido Corridor will connect Angola, DRC, and Zambia, working to extract minerals, but also unique opportunity for us to focus on investing in sustainable energy, to lay cable along those lines for renewable energy as well as digital connectivity. And it's also an opportunity to help with food security. There's a lot of rich agricultural land in Zambia, which right now is just not being used because there's no way to extract the agriculture. This also should hopefully help to diversify the supply chains as we talk about the energy diversification or energy transition, and making sure that there's not just one country that's monopolizing all of the resources we need in order for batteries, for solar panels, et cetera. We're also investing in the Philippines. We just announced 2 weeks ago the Luzon corridor, which will create a rail corridor connecting the ports in the Philippines together with us and Japan. And this will also help the same idea with the cables, rail, and food security. Separately, we announced at the G20 last September the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, which has the same concept, and we're looking to continue progress on the planning for the IMEC moving forward. All of these projects are led by the United States and the G7, partnering with the private sector as well as our like-minded partners and sovereigns in the Gulf to help to invest in some of these infrastructure projects in renewable energy, hoping that the Gulf will kind of invest in their own disruption and making sure that there's renewable and clean energy globally in emerging markets, as well as in their own countries going forward.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I want to turn to the whole panel with my next question. Obviously, we're on the sidelines here of the G7. If you can make one ask to policymakers about the outcomes that you're hoping for, or Lindsay, in your, what are the outcomes that the U.S. is hoping for? What is the most important ask you would like to make, and also what areas are you hopeful for? So maybe Alessandro, I'll start with you, and then we'll go down the line.
It's maybe a little bit a repetition of what we've been hearing before, but I mean, there's a significant amount of monies that are available, potentially available for the right projects. The real difference is going to be made if we really can unlock infrastructures and create, through projects, eventually cornerstone of infrastructure that are going to allow the project to flow. It's not about really to create financing or create support and funding for pilots here and there. It's really how we move real infrastructure to really enable the deployment of the technology at scale. That will be, sort of a dream in this moment, but I think if collectively we are going to push in the right direction here, we're going to get there.
I think my hope is through this G7, finding some cohesion amongst all of us leaders in the investment process. We're really thankful for Prime Minister Meloni's leadership in the G7 and her announcement of the Plan Mattei, which Italy is pushing this year, and there's a lot of synergies between the United States policy priorities and Italy's. And I think money, like Alessandro just said, is not the issue. Capital, everyone wants to invest in sustainable and clean energy. There's tons of capital. I think one of the issues is that these projects need to be commercially viable. It needs to make sense, and people need to be getting a return for their investment. So I think if we're able to work, the United States and G7 partners and other investors can work with host governments of low and middle income countries to establish commercially viable project pipelines for people to be able to invest in, to see the interconnectivity, and for these synergies to really come to life. I think that is my hope, is to have that kind of a conversation.
For me, it's long-term planability and certainty. As I said, we're in a long cycle business as energy, and I think what would be helpful for all of us to know when we plan our projects, what's the business model, what's the financial model, and also then for the supply industry to make the necessary investments. I think there's already good examples in bits and pieces. If I look at Germany, the build out of the grid, there's very much certainty until 2042 what needs to get built. The TSOs are able to make commitments on those plans, and the industry is scaling up to those plans. I think all around, if we look at hydrogen, if we look at the renewable build out, I think it would help the whole industry if we have that certainty all around to make sure we build up the supply chain and the infrastructure in the most efficient manner, and then also lower the cost of electricity or the cost of the infrastructure, because that's the only way once we know the longer-term plan.
Okay, so I'll reinforce the message of the cooperation. So acknowledging the cooperation, it's very good. The hope is that behind acknowledgement, there is the real intention to launch cooperation program at industrial level, because only working at industrial level, it is possible to share effort and also develop a market for the deployment of the technology that it's wide enough to give hope to startups and to new launches to somehow sufficient volumes to develop the technology. So again, I think it's not only, let's say, acknowledging the cooperation, but really it's time to start acting.
All right, thank you. I think that was actually incredible round because it covered everything from the supply and the infrastructure to really the need to, you know, Alessandro, I like what you said, not just, oh, a pilot here, a pilot there, but really how can we get to actual deployment at scale? Lindsay, it's viable projects, right? And then finally also collaboration. So I think I want to, in our last round, because obviously we're always short on time for these conversations, dive more into risk reduction. And Lorenzo, I want to really start with you. New technologies, new advanced technologies, energy operators, it's a new area, exposes you to new risks, but also costs. So what are you looking for the government to really do to help you shoulder that risk?
Okay, so I think that with the changing mix in the technology, we change also the fundamental structure of the cost of each technology. If we look at the LCOE, for example, and we consider gas, so gas, it's 85%, it's variable costs. When you go to renewables, then it's almost 100% fixed cost. And if you go to nuclear, then it's something like above 80% fixed cost. So today, the market model is still based on most of the country on a model which is, let's say, a spot market. So where somehow the price is formed by the marginal technology. So this somehow with the changing of the mix, it's no more actual. So the prices are decreasing, and this is not giving the signal for the developers to invest enough in those technologies that need to be deployed to support the energy transition. Therefore, we have to work on the market model according to the evolution of the mix in order to give certainty of the return on the investments. And this certainty is very important because we need to mobilize private capital, private equity, and not only governmental support in order to, let's say, deploy the technology. And this is for the existing technology. Then we have new technology coming. And so when you try to look at how to finance and how to support the development of a first of a kind or a first in a country, then it's very difficult because it's not bankable. So nobody is going to support you at the early stage of the construction of your project. So here it is important to have a sharing of the risk with the country, with the governments, in order to somehow support the construction of the first of a kind, support, let's say, the starting of a new technology. Then once the plant is built, then it's much easier to swap the financing to support. So I think these are two elements important. Change the market model, look at CFD or, let's say, RAB models to support and to give the right price signal and support the first of a kind.
Thanks, Lorenzo. And Tim, I want to go back to you on the difference in transatlantic policies. How do you see Inflation Reduction Act versus Net Zero Industry Act kind of address risks differently, as Lorenzo just outlined? And is there actually real money in the Net Zero Industry Act from your perspective?
So I think there's always a question I get, what's better, the IRA or the European approach? First of all, there is enough money on both sides of the Atlantic. There's a whole different philosophy how you get to that money. And I heard that comparison once. IRA and I used a soccer example. I think that fits to Italy. It's, IRA is like you're the coach of a soccer team and you tell your team, go score a goal. That's the IRA. Very simple. You go out on the field, you win. The European side is a bit more difficult. It's when the coach says, go score a goal in the 63rd minute in the upper right-hand side of the goal with your left foot. And that's what it shows the complexity, how you get to the money, right? It's, once is you go, shoot the goal, the other one has a lot more hoops to go through. And we have seen that also as a company. We're expanding. We're very lucky out of the IRA. We got, quite a substantial grant for the expansion of our transformer factory. What we see, it's a lot easier and a lot more plannable for us on the US side versus the European side. I think, also there's regional differences. If you work with federal governments, with state governments, also on the European side, a lot is doable, but it all depends how easy it is to get to the money. And that's kind of my conclusion on that.
Okay, how easy is it to get to the money? Alessandro, what's your experience since you're at the forefront of project development?
Project development is really a new chapter, actually. It has been, in particularly for a company like ours, we play ourselves sometimes, obviously in partnership. It's fundamentally to have a partner that can do that kind of activities. Project development helped to accelerate actually the deployment of technology. Obviously, they deal with all the challenges that we've been mentioning here. At the end of the day, if they have to run a project, they have to kick off a project, they have to reach the FID of a project, they have to deal on all the challenges we've been talking here. The risking project development goes down, apart from everything that has been said here, that's absolutely right and correct, and they see us very much in agreement. There's two elements on the risking side that we don't talk enough. Number one is permitting. Permitting has to come through. It's something that really the administration can help, is really how the permitting is going to work, and that is true for everywhere. Second element is really about people. One of the challenges that we have in the industry is availability of people. That is reflected, crystal clear in certain costs that eventually for running a project you're gonna be in front of. So we need to bring back in the energy sector attractiveness for young generation, because obviously through the energy transition there is this opportunity. And I do believe, we are in front of a huge opportunity, not a huge risk here.
Thank you. And Lindsay, for you, you've given us a really fantastic introduction to the economic corridors policy. Congratulations. But it's across multiple borders, some of these economic corridors. How are you seeing, or what efforts are you taking to overcome some of these barriers, aligning, permitting, aligning, planning infrastructure, and to really unlock money fast? Because you said by 2027, some really ambitious investment goals.
I agree, very ambitious. Thank you. The United States has been helping to mitigate some of these risks by working closely with the private sector, the World Bank, and the MDBs. So we've been hosting several investment forums, bringing everyone together to talk about the various risks involved with some of these cross-border investments, whether it be currency risk, commodity risk, political risk, local currency lending, some of these issues that companies and governments and investors alike are facing. So we've continued the conversation and been coming up with creative solutions that we can then work with some of our agencies on, whether it be DFC, USTDA, EXIM, or Ajay Banga at the World Bank. Everyone has been very involved in how we can kind of take some of that risk away by us, the United States, investing at least a little bit of money to wrap the American flag around these projects and drawing Western companies to these projects in some of the emerging markets where there can be some of these risk challenges.
Okay, great. We're coming to an end, so just a last lightning round for all of you, because we want to leave the audience with some optimism. What's the one hope you have to help scale the transition in a meaningful way over the next 5 years? Lorenzo, you get started.
Okay, so I go back to the concept of now. So I think that it's the hope is that we start the different governments in the G7 and beyond starts with relevant and significant projects for transformation of the energy sector, but not that just thinking as a way to reach decarbonization, but really to work on industrial and economic growth for the country. So this should be an occasion not only to decarbonize our economies, but also to support growth. And by doing that, I mean, that could, let's say, create much more momentum than just thinking at 2050. Thank you.
For me, it's what was also said on the previous panel, going into action, seeing the first large-scale hydrogen projects in the next 5 years, seeing a massive build-out of the grid next 5 years, making sure we have the capacity and the projects to really move the energy transition forward.
I think that a shared understanding is really important over the next 5 years, making sure everyone's on the same page of what's required in terms of capital, but also in terms of how much energy and what kind is needed for the energy transition. It's an election year in America, so I'm just hoping that we can continue to be a leader in that space despite who our government is led by.
Project scale. We need project scale.
All right. Okay. Well, I just want to thank my wonderful panel for this really exciting discussion. Sounds like there's enough capital available, but the question is how can we disperse it as efficiently as possible through collaboration, through faster policy making, through policymakers listening more closely to the market and understanding how different pieces of the puzzle fall into place in what sequence, because not everything is aligned, different time frames. And then, of course, I think we're hoping, thank you so much, Lindsay, that this kind of investment and optimism for investment in emerging markets can continue and we can see real progress at COP27. So please applause. Thank you very much. And there's a 15-minute coffee break for you now, after which I'm asked to remind you that the next session will start promptly. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gerard Ostheimer. So I'm very excited to introduce my panel. We're going to move quickly because the day is getting long. If we could please, when I introduce you, please come forward and start sitting here. So Liana Gutta is the Director General of Fuels Europe. Mati Lemus is the CEO of Neste. Paulo Macedo is Global Director for International Relations, Policy and Advocacy for Raizen. And Yves Verkamen is the Chief Commercial Officer for a new company called TESS that we'll be hearing about today. So while our panelists take their seats, I'm just going to remind people that currently, transportation accounts for about 25% of energy demand, and that the amount of demand for energy for transportation is not shrinking. Instead, it is persistent and growing. Demand from aviation, maritime, and road from around the world calls for increased production and use of low-carbon fuels. And this afternoon, we are here to consider how to realize the future of fuels and to consider the innovations necessary in policy, in market creation, in feedstock production, and in energy security. So, thank you for thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking your seats. I will start with Liana and then move stage left to stage right, and I will ask all of you a fairly generic but important question. What is your vision of the future of fuels and the evolution of fuel technologies? Liana, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you very much, Jared, and I would like to thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really honored to be here to this very interesting panel and in view of this important declaration that we signed earlier today. So regarding the future of fuels, I had the opportunity to mention earlier this morning in the previous event that we believe as a sector that energy transition and climate neutrality in transport cannot be achieved without renewable fuels. I represent Fuels Europe, the European Fuel Manufacturers Association, which means we represent all companies operating refineries and industrial sites in Europe, producing fuels covering 100% of the production capacity in Europe, and also supplying the energy to cover 97% of the energy needs to move people and goods. And our member companies produce mostly, of course, conventional fuels, but also renewable fuels because they have started their transformation. A few years ago, back in 2018, our association announced or presented our vision 2050 towards climate neutrality. And this was 2 years before even the Green Deal. And 2 years later, we presented our roadmap under the title Clean Fuels for All. So according to our vision, we estimate that, for example, currently the fuels demand in Europe is around 360 million tons of fuels per year. And we estimate that by 2050, this demand will be reduced to around 160 million tons per year. And according to our Clean Fuels for All roadmap, we have the technologies, we have the sustainable feedstock availability to be able to cover these future needs in 2050, 160 million tons, as I said, by renewable fuels. So every single liter of fuel in 2050 used in transport can be renewable and not fossil. Of course, this is a conditional target and something that is achievable, but under conditions. And the conditions are the enabling conditions that would create a business case in Europe for producers, fuels producers, to invest in renewable fuels. And we estimated that these investments, in order to produce these renewable fuels that Europe will need by 2050, are around 650 billion euros. So we have technologies, we have feedstock availability, we have industrial assets, strategic assets all around Europe and the broad infrastructure to supply renewable fuels in the coming years. We also have the investment capacity as a sector and the human skills to deliver these large and complex projects that will be needed towards energy transition. The only thing that is missing, as I said, are the enabling conditions. And the good news also for our sector is that this transformation has already started. So our members operate refineries, as I said, but even the conventional refineries co-process a mix of feedstock, both crude oil and renewable feedstock, which means they reduce the carbon footprint of the fuels produced. But also we have members that have already transformed traditional refineries to biorefineries, and also we have members who have dedicated industrial assets producing 100% of renewable fuels. So there is a will to transform, but we need to create these enabling conditions for the big investments that are needed to start, because as other speakers previously said, we are a sector with a long-term investments. So if we start now and we want to invest in renewable fuels, we need to know the market size after 10 or 15 years, which is the payoff period of our investments. And if we don't have this security to know what the size of the market will be, it's very difficult to reach an investment decision.
That's a very powerful message that as you anticipate fuel demand going down, you also anticipate the ability of Europe to meet its own fuel demand.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So,
it is achievable.
It is achievable with a lot of work, I'm sure. Okay. Matti, if you don't mind, as one of the companies that would contribute to producing these and distributing these fuels, your thoughts on what is needed and any comments you might have on the scenario that Liana laid out.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this event. It was a great event this morning with the Sustainable Biofuels Forum, and this is a great continuation of this important dialogue. Very briefly introducing Neste. Neste is a pioneer in the production of sustainable renewable fuels. We started more than 15 years ago. Today we produce on 3 continents. We actually source waste and residue feedstocks in more than 60 countries. On the question that was asked on the future of fuels, we very much believe that there is the need for a complementarity of solutions. If you think of the challenge of transitioning away from fossil fuels in transport alone, it is clear that we are talking about billions of tons, not millions and not hundreds of millions, but billions of tons in the coming decades. And it is clear that to reach this ambition, electrification plays an important role. It is equally clear that sustainable renewable fuels play an important role. And I would argue it is equally clear that we need new technologies to complement these 2 solutions, whether it is then renewable hydrogen, power to X, whether it's expanding the feedstock pool for sustainable renewable fuels, from example, from lignocellulosic sources. All of these solutions will be needed. And the observation is that they actually complement each other by looking across different geographies, looking across different applications. The combination of different technologies actually accelerates the development. It accelerates the movement to decrease carbon CO2 emissions, and this is what we clearly believe in. The other perhaps important message I would add, and I think this is building on what was said in the previous comments, is that we very much see the importance of innovation. Neste, for example, as a company, has 1 out of 5 employees working in either research or engineering. We continuously look for expanding the pool of sustainable feedstocks. We are working both on today's solutions, looking at lower quality waste and residue feedstocks, but in parallel we look at totally new technologies which further widen the feedstock pool. And this is exactly what is needed in our view to move from tens of millions tons to hundreds of millions tons as the contribution that sustainable fuels can be doing. Here I also echo perhaps the comments on what is important in our view to foster innovation. It is of course about cooperation and partnerships that accelerates cooperation, but also it is about cooperation between industry, private sector and governments. And here we see in particular the importance of long-term frameworks that are important because we are operating in an industry where both the research but also the investments take time. So our focus is very much already today in the 30s and 40s. So the importance of long-term predictable frameworks, the importance at the same time of a technology-neutral approach is very important from our perspective. Perhaps a final comment I would make is that from our perspective, we feel it's intuitive thinking of sustainable biofuels that they do play an important role in hard-to-abate sectors such as aviation or maritime. But it's also good to note that when we think of road transportation, even with all the work that is being done on electrification, it will take time. It will be a long time that current technologies and future technologies coexist. And it has, for example, been estimated that 2030 in the heavy-duty sector, 90% of the vehicles are still running on liquid fuels. And even for light-duty vehicles, a majority could still run on liquid fuels. So we come back to this concept of complementarity. We need solutions both for existing vehicles and for future technology.
We'll get back to that. Thank you. That's perfect. Paolo, I'm going to ask a favor. I'm going to let Yves go because he is actually stunningly short on time. So Yves, do you mind going? And then we'll go back to Paolo.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Very interesting question. And of course, renewable fuel is going to be a key part of the future energy system without any doubt. Also, renewable molecules as such will be a key part. Don't forget, because I always have the impression that people tend to forget, 25% of today's energy is electricity, 75% are molecules, solid, liquid, and gas. So we still have a long way to go to electrify a lot of these parts. And so, of course, biofuels are a key part of this future energy mix. We at TES, we are, as you were saying, a new company, a kind of a new kid in town, because next to the biofuels, we are really focusing on another type of fuel, not from a biological origin, but rather from using the green electricity, converting it into green hydrogen, adding CO2, and ending up with a molecule that is exactly having the same characteristics as natural gas. And so you end up with a CH4 molecule that has the beauty that you can afterwards immediately inject it into existing infrastructure. You can transport it through pipelines, you can liquefy it, you can blend it with LNG and mix it like that. And on top of that, the customers don't have to do anything at all neither. And those who want to switch from natural gas to hydrogen, they have a big step to make to change their infrastructure. The infrastructure needs to be there, whereas with the product that we are developing, the synthetic methane, this is no longer necessary. By the way, we call it ENG, electric natural gas, because it is made out of electricity and looks like natural gas. And so just to building on the fact that it is a real drop in fuel, also for mobility, this is already helping a lot, because besides the liquid fuels, you've got already in maritime LNG vessels, you've got LNG trucks as well. For them, it's a kind of no-brainer to consider this type of synthetic methane as their next steps in decarbonization, because they can gradually integrate the ELNG or the ENG or the ECNG into their mobility plan and build up, depending on also the production that in the meantime will ramp up. So that's really what we're doing at TES. So we are about 100 people working globally. And of course, there is a big complementarity, and I think there is a way also to integrate biofuel and synthetic fuels together as well. Because basically, as they're all having the same characteristics, it's again a no-brainer.
Yves, so since you might have to leave at any moment,
10 minutes.
If you, so when you generate your CO2, are you doing direct air capture, or are you capturing from an enriched source? And is it possible that enriched source could actually be of biogenic origin that would...
Indeed. So let's say in the ideal world, and hopefully it will be there in 10, 15 years, direct air capture is going to help making all these synthetic fuels being produced in a very easy way at a low cost. Today we focus on biogenic CO2, which means biogenic CO2 is CO2 coming from natural sources. Like if you produce ethanol out of corn, you have CO2 that is being released. If you capture that CO2, you have biogenic CO2, or biogas production plant is also having CO2 when it switches from biogas to biomethane. So this is really the first focus of our production units using biogenic CO2.
So what's the CI for your fuel?
So it's so there are
carbon intensity.
If you want to go into these details, so Europe has defined what a renewable molecule should look like, an RFNBO, so a renewable fuel of non-biological origin, and you need to be 70% below the diesel reference, and we are at 5 or 6%. So,
wonderful.
So it's really
wonderful.
It's a no-brainer if this can become reality.
So you might benefit from carbon intensity-based long-term policies.
Of course, no, we need, and it has already been discussed previously, but for us, we are a project developer. And so what do we need in order to have a project working? That's bankability. We need to go to a bank, and the ultimate judge of a project will fly or not is the bank, if you have project financing, which means everything needs to be in place. You need to have a customer. A customer is requiring certainty. He wants to know, from a regulatory point of view, is this product going to meet my demand? Is it going to meet my obligations or not? Permitting has been mentioned as well. Is it permittable? The technology, in our case, it's relatively straightforward because we use existing technology. Electrolyzers, methanization is in fact a very old technology developed by a certain Professor Sabatier in 1912. No, we got the Nobel Prize in 1912. So it's a very easy technology. It's just the scale. And then banks get a bit scared when they see the size of these projects. And then they are questioning even the technology. So all these things, again, need to be in place before we can get our funding. I know I'm rushing, but it's also because I'm so passionate about it as well, but I also need to catch a flight. So.
Okay. Thank you. You are excused at any point.
Thank you.
All right, and so, sorry, Paolo, back to you, but again, so what is your or Hyzon's vision of the future of fuels and the evolution of fuel technologies? Please.
Thank you. Thank you for the Atlantic Council for the invitation, the Politecnico di Torino, and yourself, Gerard, for the invitation as well. I was thinking back, since the morning, one of the fears of being a speaker is to kind of repeating what the previous speakers actually said, and then I heard Matthew this morning, and then I heard him again. I said, "My goodness, he's hitting all my key messages." But the good thing about all this is that it really does show that everyone who's been invited to be here and contribute somehow to the debate is very well aligned. So that says something, right? That sends a very clear message of some of those points. And for the ones who don't know, Raízen is a joint venture between Shell and the largest agriculture company in Brazil, Cosan. We are a relatively young company, 13 years old, but already big in size, almost 56,000 employees and 35 refineries, and we are building another 20 exclusively for second-generation ethanol. We are the largest cane, ethanol, and sugar producer and exporter in the world. And we are really investing on the waste-based biomass lately. And there's another added factor that really brings me to that panel, which is luckily we were appointed for the chairship of the B20 on the task force of climate change and energy transition. So we are very glad to be here and in being able to contribute. So to answer to your question, Gerard, specifically about the future of fuels, we have a very simplistic concept, which is pretty much based in three premises. One, again, pretty much what Matty said earlier today, we advocate, although we are a biofuel company, we advocate for all solutions. We need them all, right? Given the mandates, the commitments, and most importantly, the needs. The second one, we firmly believe that every decision-making has to be based on science. Right? We do appreciate the importance of geopolitics, but it cannot be in the driving seat of decision-making. It could be a variable, but definitely not the main decision maker. And finally, we also advocate for a comprehensive, real, full life cycle analysis of all technologies. So, and let the consumer decide which one fits them better, and also help policymakers to make their best decision based on, again, on real, full life cycle analysis rather than just myth and false premises. So that would be the recipe for the future of fuels, regardless of the technology. And as I said, we need them all because we are lagging behind in this race for decarbonization.
Thank you. Liana, we are here on the margins of a G7 energy, climate, and environment ministers meeting. Would you mind sharing your thoughts on what actions G7 countries should take?
Thank you. If I can take 2 minutes to build on the complementary technologies that Matti mentioned, and coming back to the numbers I gave you, the reduce of demand will happen, we expect it to happen because of the electromobility that will take the place of the fossil fuels. And moreover, this amount that we estimate for 2050, we expect to be covered both by sustainable biofuels and the fuels as well. So all technologies are needed to be complementary the one to the other in order to achieve these very ambitious goals. So we need all to be inclusive and not exclusive in the technologies that we use, and we need to give room and space to all of them. So coming back to your question regarding the importance of this G7 summit and this declaration, we believe that this is really a very important initiative because it brings together all stakeholders from these big economies in the country. And the truth is that the ambition of the energy transition and the ambition to produce these fuels to decarbonize transport sector is so huge. We can say on our part as fuels producers that even though we have been operated for 150 years with a standard business model, and we had business as usual. Nowadays, in order to adapt and address this challenge of transformation, we need to transform everything. We need to transform our assets, our process, our feedstock, our products, our business model, and also we need to create new value chains. So in order to address all these challenges, you need to have stakeholders from all this value chain, and we believe that this initiative of G7 can be critical. It is important also to create a momentum and hopefully to change a little bit, I would say, the mindsets that we see in the European Union, where the European Union so far seems to select specific technologies for specific transport sector, which we believe it's not beneficial to the energy transition. We believe that we should be inclusive, as I said, and not exclusive. We should also give the option to the consumers to select the technology that fits better to their needs instead of the policymakers to select specific technologies. And therefore, as I said, I believe that this initiative and this priority that G7 countries give to biofuels can really create a momentum that may change things in the coming years.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to skip to a new question for Matti, sort of on the complementarity theme. Matti, what role do you see for green electrons and green hydrogen as an enabler of low GHG emissions fuels? And essentially, will green hydrogen more enable other green fuels, or will it be more of a standalone fuel? How do you see that playing?
Well, thank you for the question, and I think it's probably a great example of this, how there are different solutions, different technologies, and how they can complement each other. If I take the specific example of green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, I don't think the answer is either or.
Okay.
Because it's clear that on one hand, and that's, for example, something Neste is looking at as a company, you can create green hydrogen and actually use it to produce lower carbon intensity fuels by just replacing fossil hydrogen in the production process of, for example, sustainable renewable fuels. So it can be a great way to actually, without having to build a new infrastructure, new logistics, to create a drop-in fuel that is even lower carbon intensity. So replacing fossil hydrogen in the production of either fuels or chemicals. At the same time, looking at the challenge we have as society, as an industry, that we need over time to grow the pool of feedstock, it is of course also a great long-term avenue to actually convert green hydrogen together with CO2 into e-fuels, for example. And we heard in the earlier speech that this is one of the technologies that is of course also available to over time grow sustainable fuels, in this case coming from CO2 and green hydrogen.
But you do see a role for just hydrogen for hydrogen.
Yeah, and ultimately...
Maybe it doesn't have to be for transport, it could be for industry, it could be for... How do you see... Where do you see, let's just say, neat hydrogen? Where do you see that playing?
And that would be exactly the third one. Obviously, there is a possibility to use also hydrogen directly. It could be used either in the combustion engine or it could be used in fuel cells. Of course, here then again, it takes some time because one needs to build the infrastructure for distribution. One needs to build this very big scale of green hydrogen. But I think I come to my opening comment. It's a perfect example where one technical solution can actually be combined with different technologies.
While you have the mic, one last question for you. When you think of complementarity, what is in your mind?
When I think of complementarity, I think it's important to both use the technologies that are available today, because we heard also here today we have an urgency to start reducing emissions. We need to use the technologies we have today. For example, sustainable fuels, and I take the example of aviation. We use today sustainable aviation fuels because they can be used in today's planes. And at the same time, we need to work on tomorrow's solutions that typically take more time. We need to build then new infrastructure, new production technologies, and then complement it, because over time we will need both. That's the only way to accelerate this. And again, aviation, I think, is a beautiful example. In parallel to working on the solutions that are available today, sustainable aviation fuel capabilities are clearly growing. Neste as a company, for example, has invested billions in the last few years into those capabilities. But in parallel, the industry is doing research on solutions which can then help the decarbonization in the next, let's say, mid and longer term future. Whether it is e-fuels, whether it is, for example, sustainable aviation fuel from like lignocellulosics, or even direct electrification of fuel cells.
Thank you. Paolo, how do you see the evolution of ethanol? Where is the ethanol molecule going to be used 10, 20, 100 years from now? How do you see that evolving?
So, yeah, thank you for that question. So until very recently, ethanol had just pretty much two applications, which was liquid fuels, or even we would burn the biomass to generate more electricity. This is what we call the second wave. The third wave would be adding the waste-based ethanol, as we call it, second-generation ethanol.
And the benefit of the waste-based is on the carbon intensity, or is it just the ability to use a resource that's underutilized?
Actually, there is one more. To use the resource that is underutilized, its carbon intensity, but also it gets away from the debate between food versus fuel in a more clearly way. But going back to your question, is the way we see ethanol moving forward is as the base for green hydrogen. There's more hydrogen molecules in ethanol than in the air. The green ammonia, green biomethane, biogas. So there is a realm of options for ethanol moving forward as a blending solution for e-fuels as well. So there is many applications for ethanol, and just as Maddie says, there are we need to start working on the future of fuels today. But going back to your question to Liana about what would be the message to the G7 is not to expect that the work that we're doing for the future of fuels would imply in delivering the solutions today, because that's not going to happen. You know, the whole industry is working for the future, investing in the future, but we still have to deliver today, or actually we have to deliver yesterday, because the needs are urgent. And if there is one message, and I'm going to steal a little bit your questions to Liana, is if there are two messages that I can give.
Please, and then we'll finish on these two messages.
To the G7 is, you know, if the G7 starts picking winners, you know, there are only two consequences for that. One, we're going to fall short of the commitment, the mandates, the needs that we have to decarbonize, but also we're going to disincentivize new investments in technology, because since they pick winners, right? And so we're asking them to, you know, to put science in the middle of the decision making. But allow me to still paraphrase Vijay, who is still in the, you know, I see that, but I did appreciate one of the things he said, that we see all those pledges and MOUs being signed, which is great. It looks fantastic in the picture, but if they're not turning into plans, and the plans are not turning into actions, hopefully I paraphrased you well, and we're not going to see anything being done, and we're not going to see any mandate being accomplished, or even the needs to decarbonize the world being accomplished. So thank you.
Thank you, and let's thank our panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Not last conversation, but last panel of the day. And let me ask Huda Lal, Ricardo Mollo, and Bob Munger to join me here. It was a long day of discussions, but let me, my name is Marco Margheri. I have the honor to serve as the chair of the World Energy Council Italy, and in real life, serve in Washington for E&I. And let me thank again the Atlantic Council, Landon Durance, his fantastic team at the Global Energy Center for helping us to convene all these speakers in Torino for the G7. And let me in particular welcome Deputy Secretary Dave Turk, who is entering the room. So thank you very much for being with us. And it's an honor to have you here. And we look forward to listening to you. But before that, there's a lot of good transatlantic comments that we expect on the future of power. And the future of power seems to be one of those areas where the debate that starts after COP28 is fastest evolving. COP28 marked a very significant step forward in affirming the role of decarbonized power and renewables, with the pledge to increase by 3 times the scale of installed capacity. It was a landmark COP on a number of different areas that have an impact on power, take energy efficiency, and take nuclear pledges. And it was the first COP where the US government brought fusion as a portion of the breakthrough solutions. If I'm not incorrect, Bob will criticize me if I am. One of those breakthrough solutions that Bill Gates calls the energy miracles. And differently from miracles that cannot be expected, energy miracles have to be prepared and sought after. So we'll delve a bit into that. And ultimately, this year, Irina's report was showing a staggering progress in installing renewable. If I'm not incorrect with the number, 463 gigawatts, 86% of total additions. And yet, this is so far away from scale, and yet climate finance is 1/3 of where it should be, and half of it is concessional finance. So it looks like we're striving to do our best, and we're not yet finding the patterns to go to scale. And I will start from a region where this is particularly true, which is not the mature markets of Europe and the US that have been seeing the vast portion of those additions. There was an article saying that Sub-Saharan Africa installed last year less solar capacities than Belgium alone. And let's see how in the Mediterranean, and I'll introduce the first panelist, Huda Lal, Director General of the Organization for Energy and Mediterranean Energy and Climate, I'll add cooperation. Cooperation is really the bulk of what OMEC is doing. Before we move to Bob Munger, CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems, and Ricardo Mollo, CEO of Renexia, for their commentaries. Huda, I would like to bring you in and give us a bit of picture of how power fits into a Mediterranean story, even in these dark days in our region.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting OMEC and inviting me to this discussion and bringing this lovely Mediterranean region in the discussion. As you said, indeed, renewables and power is accelerating everywhere, but in the Mediterranean region, we are not that much progressing, despite that we all know the region is endowed with the best wind and solar resources in the world. And when we look at in our analysis in what is the situation, so our full-time job is since 30 years now of existence of our organization is to follow how energy is evolving sector by sector, country by country. And we see that the situation today in the European Union, so the North Mediterranean countries is doing quite well in terms of accelerating with a vision, with targets, with renewable fit for 55, renewable repower. Whether in the South Mediterranean countries we have targets, so targets are there, and the implementation is not yet there. So today, we are far from the speed that is needed, and when we have analyzed what is needed in the future, when we looked at what would be the impact of reaching the unconditional NDC, so this is quite business as usual trend, we will still be very far from tapping in the South Mediterranean countries the renewables potential, so really very, very far. And when we look at also what have been achieved for the last years, we have accelerated, but we are not yet there. So what is this? We have heard these days about what is needed to get there, but also there are some specificities of the region, which first of all needs to stabilize. So we absolutely need stability in the region. We need also to accept that this region needs to, that we build the solutions together with the South Mediterranean countries as well, and not for the Mediterranean countries. And we need also to be technology neutral and to take into consideration also this issue of methane emissions. So this is out a little bit from the power sector, but the good news is that the power sector is the power which is easiest to decarbonize. So there is clearly a willingness from the South Mediterranean countries as well to fasten the integration and to cleaning of the renewable energy for the power sector. But we need to have a cooperation, and we have very good examples for successful cooperation in the region, not specific to renewables, such as the East Med Gas Forum, which has been able to work and to make energy for peace. Unfortunately, the situation today is giving some fragility to that, and also even with the cooperation with the US. So yes, we have plenty of potential. We have many barriers that are hindering that we accelerate, and we believe that bringing focus on this region, which will be very interesting because it could be a laboratory for the world, showing that we can succeed, because we have developing countries in the north, we have developed countries, we have a lot of complementarities, so we deserve that we focus and we make of this region a laboratory for succeeding the energy transition, which will require decarbonizing the power sector and electrifying more and more. Thank you.
Well, and thank you for flagging this, this area of regional cooperation as one of the areas where the United States and European countries and the European Union are closely working together. You mentioned the EMGF yesterday. Assistant Secretary Ambassador Payet sat in New York, I believe, with Osama Mubarak, the Secretary General of the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. And let me remind ourselves of what Osama came to tell the Atlantic Council crowd, enlarging the scope of the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum to all those building blocks of decarbonization of that sector that were needed to project this cooperation into the energy transition. So clearly there is a sense of recognition that the transition is needed in those countries. Egypt in particular has hosted COP27. So that is the reassuring bit, and obviously we're far away from being reassured yet, but clearly I would summarize your message by saying that energy can be a platform to restart the moment in which we will be able to do so. And let me come to this part of the existing technologies. Riccardo, your company is a leader in wind technologies and in offshore wind technologies, and congratulations, by the way, on building projects in Italy. Italy is known to have beautiful coasts, and probably putting wind farms in Italy is a tad more complicated than elsewhere. But how do you see the contribution of technology developments in your sector? And a lot was said in earlier panels on the needs for developing grids, on the needs for policies. What are the needs in your view, for wind power to unleash all its contribution?
Marco, thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to stay with you within the Atlantic Council organization. I have to tell you, let me give you a straightforward answer saying we don't need much, or maybe we don't need anything. saying that we've been talking a lot these
yes,
days.
the minister is not here.
We've been talking a lot these days of, and I will steal Vijay's words once again, turning pledges into plans and actions. So we are on the actions side of the story at this point in time. We have under development a wind farm which will sit 80 kilometers off the coast of Sicily, and it will be able to produce 2.8 gigawatt of electric energy, meaning that if you turn this into production, will mean between 8 and 9 terawatt hour per year, which is the equivalent of 3% of the overall electric energy consumption in Italy. So one windmill farm, 3% of the overall consumption. What does it mean? It means that we can claim the future is now. It means that if the permitting phase will run as we expect, we will be able to start construction of this plant in 2.5 years from now. So the question that you posed is, what about technologies, available technologies and financing sources for these kind of things? Okay, technology is there already. Many say that offshore floating wind is not mature yet. It is not true. The technology is available worldwide. All the pieces composing a huge floating offshore wind farm, all the components are available. Of course, we need to put them together. It's going to be a massive effort. It's going to be the first of a kind, of course. And when we talk about possibility to sustain it from the capital markets viewpoint, what we only need from the regulators is sort of stability. It will take 4 to 5 years to build such a plant from the final investment decision to the moment you commission it. And over these 4 or 5 years, many things can change. The price of raw materials, inflation, and other possible disturbances. So I think the government or the governments should protect the operators from taking these risks in full. So by doing so, with the new FAIR 2 decree, which is about to be issued by the government, we should be well positioned to give it a kick. So
have you been looking in other jurisdictions? Do you think this is the same need spans across every jurisdiction? Because in the US we had a lot of debates on the IRA, that is a completely different model.
We are active in the US because we have a company which is called US Wind in Maryland, and we're developing a fairly big bottom-fixed type of windmill farm there. So the considerations concerning also the tariffs and so on are completely different. So I was addressing now what was, I think, the main aspect of this discussion today, which was the need for making it feasible in the Mediterranean Sea, which is, by the way, has two peculiar characteristics. One is water depth. You know that in Northern Europe, they can enjoy, same as in the US, fairly shallow water, allowing for bottom-fixed solutions. We have between 300 and 1,000 meter water depth. So the only technical solution is floating. That's the first characteristic. Second, the wind in the Mediterranean Sea is weaker than in the North Sea. So you have to build especially huge and very efficient type of turbines if you want to reap the harvest from these less favorable conditions. Yet, as I said before, in our, we're not only a developer, we're also an EPC contractor, so we have advanced a lot of activities in engineering and market inquiry, and we are convinced that today we can build in a feasible way such a plant in the Mediterranean Sea. And if we find this solution, this is going to be a sort of killer solution, because then it will be applicable to all the coasts around the Mediterranean Sea, which have a touristic, if you want, vocation, a touristic value, so you can't put, say, generators, windmill farms in front of the people on a beach. You need to put them off the coast, like in our case, 80 kilometers. So that's, we think this is the ideal solution for our peculiar characteristics.
Well, and it perfectly fits the picture that Huda was drawing on the Mediterranean. And I have to say, it perfectly fits what was said in a couple of panels ago. It seems that the availability of money, the availability of technology is not necessarily the bottleneck, but it's combining the different pieces to achieve replicable scale. And I think here I am coming to one of the greatest experiences I had since moving from Italy to the United States. And the minister yesterday, the Italian minister Pichetto, referred to fusion as the El Dorado. Many refer to fusion as the Holy Grail. And I moved to the United States thinking that these concepts are far to come. They are not brick and mortar concepts. The Holy Grail is something that you find somewhere that you don't know where. And when I arrived to the United States, I was fortunate enough to know this gentleman, and he showed me a completely different picture where there are cranes building stuff, and there's bricks, and there's steel. So, Bob, the inevitable question is, where is the El Dorado? I mean,
yeah. So I think on the title of this panel, I'm the most future one up here. But I think one of the key ideas is, what's the role of innovation in the technology stack for the future of energy? And one of the great things about innovation is that it can go much faster than you think. It has sort of a stick-slip part to it, that an area of technology can feel like it's stuck for a long time, then all of a sudden can go forward very fast. You see this for AI right now, that we've been in AI for a very long time, but it has now unstuck. And fusion's right now in one of these unstick phases. So we worked on fusion basically since we understood how the stars worked, because the idea of a fusion power plant is you recreate the conditions inside stars, which means you get the energy of the star, but in a machine that you can control. And if you can do that, it means that you now have energy that's decoupled from resources. So it's decoupled from where the wind is or the sun, it's decoupled from consumption. You build a machine, and you have the same energy that the universe uses. That's a very, very big idea. In order to do that, you have to actually figure out what that machine should be. And we've worked on that for a very long time, and we're now just in a phase where 2 years ago, for the first time on Earth, a machine in California was able to make more power out than in from a fusion reaction. It was able to get the conditions, a big laser run by the Department of Energy. And we're also at a time where we have about $6 billion of private capital, mostly venture-backed, entrepreneurial capital, put into fusion companies that are now trying to take that advance and other advances in materials and computation and build the first generation of prototypes and even commercial machines to make fusion power. Now that's different than making thousands of machines around the world. There would be scale that has to happen after that. But the idea that you could, at this moment, or in the next few years, have demonstration facilities, that was something that we did not foresee 10 years ago, but it's been enabled by this unsticking from the science, from the technology of adjacencies, and from the private capital. And so at Commonwealth Fusion Systems, we're the largest of these fusion companies. The roots of the company go back to MIT research and MIT partnership, but they fold in their experience in traditional energy sectors, if you look where people come from. They also fold in there a lot of experience in the commercial space industry, which was another one of these industries that went through a very, very big slip. It was stuck for a long time, and now all of a sudden we have SpaceX, we have Starlink, we have a generation of technologies that we would not have foreseen even 10 years ago. And so that's all in this company, CFS, with about $2 billion of capital, and we're building a machine outside of Boston. It's about $1 billion machine, so in terms of next generation innovation energy, it's one of the largest projects in the world. And that machine is designed to make about 100 megawatts of heat from a fusion reaction in a commercial machine, in a machine that you could build more of. The next machine after that would be then a full-on power plant to put that on to the grid. And we're actually in discussions now on siting that first power plant. And so we could be at this inflection point in the entire field of fusion. We think we are, where it goes from, when's it going to happen? Is it always 30 years away? To all of a sudden, you can see it. It's happening. And that's very similar to what we're seeing actually in AI right now. And they probably need each other, frankly, when you look at the future projections there. But it's a good moment. And when you think about the overlay then of the G7, in these areas where you have innovation, you have technology that you need to de-risk, that you need to pull together the most innovative people, that you need to be able to get through valleys of death of how do you do first-of-a-kind finance, when you need to figure out how to regulate something that just did not exist before. The G7 is a unique collection of countries because they're the most able to do that. That if we just did it in one country, which the US is in many ways a leader in thinking through the broader implications of this, well, we would not have a model that was either scalable, nor would we have a model that was informed by the equities around the world that would benefit from the technology. And meanwhile, if you focus on the entire world all at once, it's too big of a pot to boil, and frankly, there's places in the world that shouldn't be worried about when is fusion going to be there. They should be worried about what they're going to do tomorrow, today even. But the G7 can act as a convening and a harmonizing piece to point the way forward, to point to this is how we should regulate a new technology. This is how we should think about how to make the first-of-a-kind financing work to get those demonstrations done. This is how we should coordinate on R&D. And so it's exciting to see the international community actually start to have that conversation, first in bilats, but then also, I'm very thankful to be here at the G7 because we think that's the next logical step to pave the ground for what could be a fast on-ramp, much faster than maybe we've previously thought.
I think this idea of what we expect on Tuesday to come out of the G7 will drive our conversation as we wind up the panel. But let me stop you on one thing, maybe. Can we have a sales pitch for what the U.S. has done in terms of delivering a blueprint? Is that something? What would you recommend to other G7 countries and institutions such as the European Union as a checklist to run through the example that has been set in Washington, D.C.?
So if you look what the U.S. has done in fusion, they've had a very strong public research program that's de-risked the underlying science that has then made that accessible to private enterprise. They've pulled that together in public-private partnerships where you're taking the best of each side. You're taking a company like ours, which is designed to run very, very fast and try things in ways that, frankly, you could not do in academia. But you're then coupling it with academia so that you get the best science, you get the best measurements out of it. That's on the innovation side. The other piece that the U.S. has done is on the regulation. Like, how do you take an entire new industry, something that didn't exist, how do you regulate it? And there are ways to do it that we think are the wrong ways, which is to take things like, well, is this nuclear power and sort of make it like nuclear power but slightly different. Well, fusion's actually the opposite of traditional nuclear power. Fusion, it's the opposite reaction, it's the opposite materials, it's the opposite in almost every regard. Instead, go first principles and say, what would a reasonable fusion regulation that protects the public look like from the ground up? As if this someday will be a giant industry, because we think it will. And the US has done that, and the UK has done that. And so we think that's a really reasonable template to then expand, especially because the US and UK have come to similar tactical conclusions. So there's a framework in place now.
So a dedicated framework and the private-public dimension of this new industry as core. And let me, Riccardo, let me ask you and Huda to join in. Let's draw a wish list for this G7, and let me also remember that this G7 happens in parallel to a process that goes from COP28 through COP29 and then in a troika system to COP30. And we heard this in this very room this morning on biofuels with a very important set of actions and announcements. What would you ask G7 countries to concentrate upon to deliver actionable results, and both directly and in the framework of COP?
Well, the answer is very simple, in my opinion. I mean, the COP has realized that we're not on track. So we need to do something now, not tomorrow. And as I said before, there are technologies today which are completely available. The production chain is there, and we only need to kick them off. I mean, we have no excuses for that. So I think we need certainly to develop things across the borders. Yesterday, Huda and I had the very first contact, but I think we will certainly make progress on it. I mean, these technologies are very well fit for many purposes, including our own Piano Mattei in Italy, whereby we can actually facilitate investments across the border using these technologies. And we need to do it now because, by the way, I fully agree with Bob, because we as Renexia have, say, partnered with a different technology in fusion, which is called magnetized target fusion, which is developed by a Canadian company. And more or less, we have exactly the same targets. We think that around 2034, 2035, a commercial fusion plant could actually be there. So if we want to reap the harvest of what's available now, we need to do it now. We don't want to wait for the next step, because otherwise we don't do anything. I mean, as in many cases happens. Let's not wait for the Holy Grail only. Let's work on what we have today.
And I love both of your references to the fact that the G7 is really the platform for these countries to look ahead and become future-proof. What happens when we're not in the sole realm of G7 countries? Huda, what is your expectation now that, and close us with your words, close us up with your words, now that we are in the third COP that is happening in the extended Mediterranean sphere, having COP27 being in Egypt and COP28 being in the United Arab Emirates, now moving to Azerbaijan. What can we expect? What do you expect?
Thank you very much. So the discussion yesterday we had during dinner, my friend said, human being, we suffer. When we suffer, we adapt. And when we adapt, we mitigate. And he gave the example of what happened with the COVID. As for the Mediterranean, I mean, the climate change is there. It is well known to be the hotspot for climate change. And for the years, we are suffering it. Look at what happened even in neighboring countries in Dubai. So we are there. So now we are suffering. So what the region needs is to adapt from one side and to mitigate. As for the adaptation, so this is the first measure, that we give focus to the adaptation. And as for mitigation, a lot of things happened in COP27 with bringing the industry as being the part of the solution. So this was the very first and very good progress and first step. Second, so in last year, we had this pledge for renewable energy and energy efficiency and the methane, which for the Mediterranean region fits very well. Why is this? Because of the huge potential. We cannot do differently than speed the energy transition and tap the potential of renewables. And now it is really cheap. I mean, in the South Mediterranean countries, we are endowed with the best resources, and the figures that we are having are very interesting. And there is even a business case to promote a Euromed regional energy market for that. So, and our analysis has shown before the COP that if we wish to decarbonize the Mediterranean region, we are fully in line with the pledge. So that was really not an hypothesis, but an outcome. So we need to support these countries in order to reach this pledge. We need to see, very important also for the region, which, as you know, have important resources for gas. So how to decarbonize this, and also to have the methane pledge. And we need support. So adaptation, therefore, we need to be serious about climate finance. This is my second message. Why is this? Because what we see is that this is, if we are not going to take it seriously, this will be and have a negative, it is having a negative impact on the acceleration of the renewables, for instance, in the Mediterranean region, because when you analyze and you see the difference between the unconditional NDCs and the conditional NDCs, and the difference, you know, is the access to climate finance, the energy mix is completely different. And even with conditional NDCs, we are very far from decarbonizing our system. So for the countries, they will say, okay, I did my best. This is the unconditional NDCs, but if we only get with there, we will have the region 78% still fossil fuel-based. And I didn't have access to climate finance. So let's be serious about that. What do we expect? Is there climate finance or not? So that we can also work on all the different aspects that we've been talking, regulation, interconnection, market, etc. But we really need to work on adaptation and mitigation and be very serious about the climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you. What a great convergence with what Francesco Corvaro, the Italian Special Envoy for Climate, told us on emphasizing adaptation and emphasizing de-risking of climate finance. So we will be hearing very soon what happens in the rooms of the negotiations if these are messages that are being discussed there. But please join me in thanking our great panelists and in welcome Landon Durrance for his dialogue with Deputy Secretary Turk.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a dynamic conversation today around many facets of the energy transition. An espresso-filled day in a castle, it's never too bad here in Torino. I can gladly find other avenues for cooperations with our partners in Italy. From the geopolitics to the finance to the technologies that are going to underpin this transition. We want to culminate this conversation with one that kind of does a nice bookend. Yesterday we asked ourselves why the G7, why are we here? Why are we focused on the future of energy and the conversations about in a very difficult world and a difficult setting, there's importance to like-minded countries coming together and finding solidarity and building an agenda together that then perpetuates to a much bigger community. The Italian Minister for Environment and Energy Security joined us yesterday, and I'm happy to reach across the Atlantic and bring in a perspective from Washington, D.C., a person who has worked across many administrations, understands the complexities of our energy system, but also has a rich history through the International Energy Agency and other aspects of energy diplomacy across the board and globally. So please join me in welcoming the Deputy Secretary of Energy, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Energy, David Turk. Maybe to start, Deputy Secretary, if you're looking for design ideas for Forrestal, the brutalism, I have an idea. The Politecnico di Torino is a good place to start. Look, the G7. I was just in Brussels recently, and we're in an election cycle. And in Brussels, there was an aura of when we come out of this election cycle in June, we're going to be thinking about the competitiveness of the continent of Europe. And I don't think we have to go far in Washington, D.C. to have a very similar outlook in terms of the energy systems. And so when we come together, when we find this core community of the G7, I really want to start by thinking through what it means to be competitive together. How do we find opportunities in the energy transition in a inclusive and cooperative fashion, and treating this not as something that's particularly net zero. Or, sorry, no, definitely net zero, not zero sum. You can tell the issue, the key terms I use.
Well, let me start, Landon, with big thanks for you and all that you do and our Atlantic Council colleagues. And boy, it's just terrific to be here in Turin, Torino, just a beautiful city, beautiful facility as well. For those of you who don't know the Forrestal building, which is our headquarters in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Energy, this is not what it looks like. So that's the joke. That's the joke Landon was making. Let me start with a big thanks to those colleagues who are either in the government or from G7 countries who are here. It may not be all of us, but quite a few. I think it's useful to take a step back just to appreciate how far we've come, including and especially focused on the clean energy transition and the climate challenge that faces all of us. One of the brightest spots I saw this past year was analysis by my former colleagues at the International Energy Agency that found that the G7 and advanced economies, our emissions are actually down to where they were 50 years ago. There's Paulo Frankel, our IEA colleague, who works on the renewable side. That's quite remarkable. That's an awful lot of leadership from the G7 countries in particular, to think that our emissions are the same place they were 50 years ago. Now, there's a lot more work we need to do. There's no doubt about that. Coal use in the G7 countries, advanced economies, is at the same level as it was about 120 years ago. So again, incredible progress that we've had. I think the G7 works the best when we all support each other and when we all push each other, right? If we're going to be successful on this climate challenge, and there's no alternative, we just have to be successful. I think all of us feel that way, or I hope all of us feel that way across the Atlantic and in Japan and around the world. We've got so much work to do. Getting to net zero in just a few short decade period of time is, I think it has to be one of the biggest undertakings ever in the history of humanity, certainly on the energy side, to do it that quickly. Electricity, transportation, buildings, industry, you name it, across the board. But we have progress, and I think we need to push each other, and I think it's perfectly appropriate to have friendly competition and support each other in that friendly competition. So an example of that, when President Biden came into office just a few years ago, our country, the United States, was on a trajectory to reduce our emissions about 20% from where we were with our 2005 baseline. Thanks to the President's leadership, thanks to Congress, historic legislation, we're now on a trajectory to 2030 to get our emissions reduced by 40%. So in one administration, I'd say a first term of one administration, in just a few short years, and we need to execute on all these tools that we've been given, 20% reduction to 40% reduction. That's quite remarkable, and frankly, a lot of that was spurred by the fact that Europe and other countries, including in the G7, really have stepped up. You think about where Europe is on offshore wind. I wish we were on offshore wind where Europe is on offshore wind, and good to hear in the previous panel of getting some of that offshore wind in the Mediterranean as well. We're playing catch up on that front, and that's great. It's great to have competition. It's great to push each other. There's no way we get to where we need to get to unless we have not a vicious cycle, but a virtuous cycle of outcompeting each other. I know the Inflation Reduction Act has some rough edges. We're trying to sand off those rough edges and make sure that we're all working in this friendly competition. But the economic opportunity is so huge, and one of the exciting things is to see U.S. companies here in Europe, European companies in the U.S., Japanese companies here in Europe and the U.S., and we can benefit from that. And if everybody's bottom lines improve, that means we can do things at a scale and pace we've never done before, which is what we have to do. So I actually feel really good about the state of the collaboration, competition, friendly competition, all playing with transparent rules, fair rules, and all trying to push each other.
You know, the complexity of this energy transformation, you're referencing how it does require this all hands on deck. Competition can be an enabler, but one thing that weighs on it, one headwind, seems to be the geopolitical outlook, the energy security implications that the world has to face. I think in the last several years with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this has particularly re-entered the conversation quite heavily. And it's one of the components, having negotiated not G7 text, but certainly G20 context, that this community is expected to grapple with. And I'd be interested, and I want to build on this, but just to start to think through what our energy security needs are and how we address those in the context of this big systematic change through the energy transition.
Yeah, maybe twofold answer to that. One, looking just at the last few year period of time, I feel really good and proud to have been part of a G7 community, a community of countries stepping up. I'm incredibly proud that our Congress, it took a little while, finally passed some supplemental funding for Ukraine and other countries as well. But I'm incredibly proud of what we've done on the energy side in particular, right? A friend in need is a friend indeed, and I think our country has shown that to Europe, just as Europe has shown that to our country and other members of the G7 as well. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, completely unjustified, and we had turmoil in the energy markets, not just in natural gas, but in the oil market as well. We saw some significant, severe volatility on that front. But on the natural gas side, the fact that we were able to export natural gas over to Europe in its time of need, through one winter, through two winters, et cetera, was quite remarkable, and I think shows that partnership in a very dramatic way. We also worked hand in hand to deal with spikes in oil prices as we had the Russia-Ukraine and also the COVID dynamic whacking energy markets as well. And we all worked together, including with some collective releases through the International Energy Agency. And that was quite remarkable partnership of stepping up and doing what we need to do. So that's point one, feeling proud of what we've done over the last few-year period of time. I think what we've also seen is there is no true energy security unless we decarbonize energy and we have diverse energy sources, including those energy sources that don't rely on volatile markets globally, including and especially when those supplies don't always come from friendly nations who are transparent and who are market-based on that front. If you can have more solar, if you can have more wind, if we can have the fusion breakthroughs that Bob and team are working on, if we can have geothermal, enhanced geothermal, if we can have a whole range of clean energy solutions, not only are we doing right by our responsibilities for future generations, our own generation, frankly, but future generations as well, we're going to have more diverse energy markets. Now we've got to deal with the critical minerals front, we've got to think about the supply chains, and we've got to diversify. But having control of your own solar panels, your own wind turbines, your own geothermal facilities, to me that's a much more energy secure world than the current world that we have.
Well, you know, let's dig in onto this new energy supply chain aspect. I think, you know, when you look at what I like to talk about is like the anatomy of clean energy technologies, you break it down, certain components have new vulnerabilities. There's new supply chain aspects of this. And, you know, I think there's some familiarity with the aspect of diversification, but it's taking on a much more complex outlook as we have to deal with a process that has a multitude more of components and inputs to help us achieve that clean energy future. How do you think the G7 in this context, how is the U.S. government grappling with that, especially, and let's just be honest, with you know, the Chinese government having so much control through state-owned entities over that supply chain to date?
Yeah, so just as I was saying, as we look to the clean energies of the future and making sure we've got the mining, but the supply chain, the processing piece, there's no doubt we have a lot of work to do as G7 countries, but other like-minded partners who want to have transparent markets, who want to have rules of the road that everybody can live and abide by, and that one country is not going to cut off its supply as a geopolitical threat or as a tool of coercion going forward. One thing I'd say up front, and this I think it's lost sometimes, it's usually mentioned as an afterthought, but I really want to put it up front, is when you get the lithium and you get the other critical minerals, whether they're in batteries or magnets or the full range of what we need in the clean energy economy, you can recycle those materials, right? So you can control those materials in a way that you just can't control oil or natural gas when you use it and you burn it and it's gone, and then you got to keep that steady supply. And we're already making a lot of investments, including our Inflation Reduction Act and our loan program on recycling of these critical minerals, planning ahead for when we will have the EV penetration, when we will have the solar PV penetration, et cetera, that we need on that front. And I think that's a critical distinction from oil and gas, fossil fuels, looking ahead to the clean energy technologies of the future. Not only do you own that PV and that wind turbine and people can't shut it off, but those are recyclable materials that you can have a circular economy, and that puts you in a much, much better place in those supply chains. That said, we're going to need to mine a lot, we're going to need to process a lot to get to the point where we have enough of those materials that we can recycle and use going forward on that front. And we absolutely need to have diversification. I think that's in everybody's interest. I would hope every country would see it in everybody's interest to have diversification. And right now, the biggest challenge is on the processing side. It's not the mining side, it's really on the processing side. And one of my most proud moments in this department is all the grants, all the loans that we're working to do our part in the US to have those diversification of processing materials. It's quite impressive what we've been doing. It seems like every other day now we're announcing hundreds of millions, billions of dollars for this grant, for that loan coming out, but that's the scale of which we're going to need if we're going to be serious about really diversifying our supply chains.
You know, Deputy Secretary, you reflected on, and this is something that's come up throughout the dialogue today, the importance of U.S. supply, in this case really LNG, to the European market in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the stability that this partnership brings to the process. I want to ask about the conventional side. You talked about the imperative to continue to decarbonize. Are there certain benchmarks you're looking from conventional energy as well? Particularly in the case of methane, I think there's a lot of progress on the horizon following Dubai, COP28, the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter. They think there's an expectation that there can be some momentum on here. I'd reflect on the fact that the United States just announced some framing around EPA regulations on the power plants. I'm curious for you, as we continue to empower this cooperative outlook and to empower the energy security, but also the energy transition, how that translates on issues like methane in particular.
Yeah, so I think there's room for everybody to step up. And methane, I think, is the perfect example. I see Vijay here from ExxonMobil, others who work in the industry. They know we need to reduce methane emissions. We all know we need to reduce methane emissions. It's just losing product. It's not good for our environment from the climate perspective. I like to call it the biggest no-brainer out there. But we haven't reduced those emissions as much as we know we should have collectively, not just in our country, but around the world. And there's some exciting satellite technology. There's other technology that's meaning that you can't hide your methane emissions. And I think that's incredibly powerful, right? That everybody needs to be accountable, knows they need to be accountable going forward. I also think it's perfectly appropriate to regulate in this area, right? There's some times where the government just needs to step in and say, this is not acceptable. If you're going to use the resources that are, first and foremost, the United States citizens' resources, then you're going to do it the right way, and you're going to do it in a way that protects our environment going forward. So I think there's absolutely a role to play with targeted, the kinds of EPA enforcement, the kinds of EPA regulations that are happening here. And frankly, for a company that wants to step up and do the right thing, that's just a level playing field. And so the hope is that we would all have a bit of a wind at the back to finally take care of the biggest no-brainer that I think is out there in terms of current ways to reduce our emissions and do it really quickly on that front. So there's certainly more work to do on that front, but that's an area that, again, I think we're poised to really have some remarkable breakthroughs and remarkable reductions over the next just few-year period of time. The other thing I'd say on the oil and gas company side of things too, and I've had a lot of conversations with CEOs of oil and gas companies, including energy ministers and deputy energy ministers around the world from oil and gas producing countries. Great to do work on Scope 1 and Scope 2, there's no doubt about it. We all need to reduce emissions on our own operations and our own supply chains, but we all have to be part of dealing with Scope 3. Everyone's responsible for Scope 3. If you're a company, you can't just blame consumers. Consumers just can't blame oil and gas companies. We all need to step up and have regimes in place to actually deal with Scope 3 in line with where we need it to be dealt with given our climate goals.
I want to pivot a little bit because the title of this summit is The Future of Energy. And we had an opportunity as a veteran of the Department of Energy myself. I know the capacity, the institutional capacity of our labs to innovate, to create, to have new ideas, to push the boundaries of where the energy system's headed. And I want to just give you an opportunity to reflect on that, you know, leading this vast apparatus of change. What is giving you optimism? What should we be looking at that perhaps was overlooked or should be given more attention in terms of the energy transition?
Yeah, so let me give a few examples. We've got some phenomenal, as you know, Landon, having been a Department of Energy alum, and thank you for your service at our department and broader in the U.S. government as well. There's so many exciting things we're working on. We've got 17 national labs across the country. We do all sorts of public-private partnerships, and now we have a lot more tools to help accelerate this progress. So let me give you a few examples just over the last few weeks and months. I had a chance a few weeks ago with my Chief of Staff, Greg, who's here, visit cutting-edge enhanced geothermal technology that we're working on in our country, and we're partnering with industry on this as well. This is out in Utah, about 3.5 hours from Salt Lake City, 3.5 hours from Las Vegas. It takes a little while to get there. We've got our facility called Forge, and then there's a private company there called Fervo. And what they're doing is taking phenomenal drilling technology that the oil and gas sector has been working on for many, many years and perfecting. They're drilling deeper and drilling in different types of geology. And so if you perfect this, and the drilling rates and other improvements that this company and our own site has made over the last year has been truly remarkable. And I think they'll keep having that kind of progress to where we're going to get a lot quicker on this as a solution than I think a lot of people perceive. But you can generate 24/7 power, and because you're doing it deeper, you don't need to just be on a caldera or somewhere where you're geologically hot and the magma's closer. You can basically do it anywhere. The estimates in our country alone is there's enough heat for enhanced geothermal to power the world 18 times over, just what we've got in the U.S. So it's just remarkable resource. And to see the folks working on this, the entrepreneurs, our own lab folks, our own experts, is just truly, truly remarkable. Second one, I have to point out, since Bob is here, I had a chance to go see Commonwealth Fusion outside of Boston. Incredibly impressive. And what's most impressive, the technology was super cool, Bob, I gotta say. But what was most impressive was meeting with your colleagues. Like just the talent that you've got, and I know we've got this in a number of other fusion companies out there. Not to say that every fusion company is going to succeed. We need a lot of shots on goal in order to make this happen. But the amount of talent, and it's not just nuclear physicists and fusion experts. I think, Bob, you were saying most of the workforce is actually working on the AI piece and looking at that, the material science piece, a whole range of other scientists and folks building real stuff and trying to push the envelope on the timeline with partnership. And we need to partner up even more from the federal government, U.S. federal government, and working in the G7 is an incredible opportunity, I think, on the fusion side of things. So there's a remarkable round of technology. I've got to mention one more, if I could, Landon. Virtual power plants in the grid. There is so much more we could be doing, should be doing. We did a liftoff report on virtual power plants. We just need to be smarter about using the resources we have. And I'll leave you with one thought on this, which I think bodes really well. We had a back to school, take your kids to work day, which I don't know if other people do that in Europe or elsewhere in the G7 or other countries. We had a couple hundred kids of parents at our Department of Energy. We call ourselves nerds, so I like to call these nerdlings. So these are somewhere as young as like 4 or 5, somewhere in their teens, come in, and I was supposed to speak to them. And instead of speaking to them and talking about what we do at the Department of Energy, I thought it more interesting for everybody, especially the kids maybe, to actually hear what they thought we did and what we should do at the Department of Energy and the U.S. government. And the first girl who answered, she literally jumped out of her chair and like raised her arm as high as she possibly could. I think she was about 5 or 6 or so. And she said, the Department of Energy needs to make energy without hurting the planet. Right? And like, it's such a simple thing, but it's so true, and I can't imagine we're not smart enough as a species to make energy without hurting the planet. And there are a variety of different ways to do it, and the thing that gives me the most hope is we've got phenomenal people like at Commonwealth Energy, or like working on enhanced geothermal, or working on any number of other clean energy technologies that are making a career out of it and bringing their passion into it. And it's super, super exciting. So I feel really optimistic that we're going to be able to do what we need to do. But it's a big task.
Well, let's end on this last conversation here, which is about the planet. We're at the G7, we're in Torino. Ministers across energy, environment, and climate are coming together to think through solutions. But this is a global challenge. Climate change in particular is something that we are grappling with at a global scale. Energy access is an issue that we need to be thinking through in a global scale. And so I do, compliments to the Italian presidency. They've brought the COP29 presidency through Azerbaijan is here, Minister Babayev. We have the Brazilians represented in their leadership over the G20 and the G20 presidency. So there's certainly an appreciation here in Torino that this is a global problem. I love to end with the thought of how do we make sure that when the G7 comes together, it's forming policies that are constructive for this community, but that can be broadened out for global reach so that we're really taking care of the problem and the challenges in their entirety.
Yeah, thanks, Landon. So maybe a few thoughts on this one. One, I think when you are fortunate enough to grow up in a country like the U.S. or other G7 countries where we have freedoms, where we have economic opportunity, where we have education opportunities, I think there's a special responsibility on us as individuals, but as societies as well. And so I think we need to lead. We need to lead first and foremost by reducing our emissions and getting our own houses in order. We need to lead by developing the technologies that are going to be available all across the world. The fact that the United States did a lot of the cutting edge work on solar PV, other G7 countries did a lot of the cutting edge work on PV, and now that is a huge part of the solution to bring energy access off grid in Africa and other places around the world. That is a net benefit for everyone if we develop these technologies, reduce those costs, make them as available as we possibly can. So I think there's a special responsibility, if I could put it this way, and maybe our climate negotiators don't like us talking about historic responsibility and other things that, but I'm going to say it, like, we're fortunate to live in these free, open societies where we have a culture of innovation, we have educational opportunities. I think it's incumbent on all of us to step up and be part of the solution, get our own house in order, but help others to get the benefits of clean energy, of energy more generally, and to be able to be part of the solution going forward.
Well, Deputy Secretary, as you can see from the community that's here, I think that they're broadly speaking, there's a lot of industry, civil society, and others, in addition to governments, willing to really marshal this. And it's a takeaway for me over the past year. If you look at what's happened in the context of the climate negotiations and the COP, there really is an institutional architecture now coming together to support the policies and thought leadership coming out of governments on the policy side and complement it with action. If I was to say a takeaway from the last 24 hours, it really is moving from this moment of planning into scale and action requires this collaborative environment, and we're thrilled that you can be a part of that with us as we reinforce exactly what the G7 is setting out to do to find a constructive pathway forward on some really difficult issues and challenging times. So thank you for joining us. Thrilled to have you here in Turin, and look forward to future discussions.